The sun burned high over the dusty town of Copper Creek, its scorching heat settling over the marketplace, where justice was sold cheaper than whiskey. People pressed closer, their whispers mixing with the dry wind, waiting for a punishment none truly wished to see, but none dared to stop. In the middle of the square stood Eleanor Walsh, a frail widow whose life had been worn down by grief and hardship. Her silver hair was tangled with dust. Her trembling hands clutched the edge of her torn shawl. Yet her tired blue-gray eyes still carried a spark of quiet dignity. Her crime was small, almost pitiful. She had stolen a single loaf of bread from the baker's stall, not for herself but for the orphans she cared for at the old church. Still, in Copper Creek, compassion had no price, and kindness, no defense. Marshal Sullivan, a thick man with a face carved from arrogance and cruelty, raised his whip high and barked to the crowd. 10 lashes, and let this be a lesson. The murmur of the onlookers faded as the whip cracked through the air like thunder. The first strike tore into Eleanor's back, and she gasped, staggering but refusing to cry out. The second cut deeper, drawing a shiver of pity from a few, though none dared to interfere. Children watched from behind their mothers, wide-eyed and silent. Among them, a small girl with golden hair, Lily, began to sob quietly. The afternoon sun turned the dirt beneath Eleanor's feet into something that looked almost like blood. The marshal's arm rose again, his face twisted with cruel satisfaction. The crowd shifted uneasily, torn between fear and shame, between obedience and conscience. But as the third lash was about to fall, a voice rang out clear and firm, cutting through the heavy air like a blade. "That's enough." The marshal froze mid-motion, his face twisting in annoyance as every head turned toward the sound. A tall stranger stood at the edge of the crowd. His long coat was dust-covered from travel, his broad shoulders casting a dark shadow over the ground. His hat sat low, hiding most of his face, but there was something about his stance, steady, powerful, unyielding, that demanded silence. "Who the hell are you to say what's enough?" Sullivan sneered, his hand still gripping the whip. The stranger didn't answer immediately. Instead, he stepped forward slowly, his boots crunching against the dirt, each step echoing louder than the last. The townspeople instinctively moved aside, creating a path for him. When he finally stopped just a few feet away from Sullivan, the stranger's face became visible beneath the wide brim of his hat. Strong features, weather-beaten skin, and eyes the color of a stormy sky. Eyes that held both compassion and an unspoken threat. "The name's Ethan Donovan," he said, his voice low but carrying across the suddenly silent marketplace. "And I'm saying that's enough punishment for a loaf of bread." He reached into his worn leather coat and pulled out a small pouch that clinked with the unmistakable weight of gold. "Here," he said, tossing it to Sullivan. "Consider her debt paid." Sullivan caught the pouch, weighing it in his hand. Greed flickered in his eyes as he calculated its worth, even as he tried to look defiant. The coins clinked together like a bell of surrender. "Fine," Sullivan muttered, tucking the pouch into his vest. "Cut her down," he ordered his deputies. Then, pointing a finger at Ethan, he added, "But I'll be watching you, stranger." As the ropes binding Eleanor's wrists were cut, Ethan's eyes met hers for the first time. Something passed between them, a flicker of recognition, a shadow of memory. Eleanor's breath caught, her body swaying slightly as she stared at the stranger with a mixture of disbelief and wonder. For Ethan, the moment was equally unsettling. Looking into the woman's eyes stirred something deep within him, a sense of familiarity so powerful it made his chest tighten. It was as though a forgotten melody had suddenly played a single haunting note. Time seemed to stand still as they gazed at each other, the dusty marketplace fading around them. Then Eleanor collapsed, her strength finally giving way. Ethan moved forward in an instant, catching her before she hit the ground. As he lifted her gently, he felt a strange sense of rightness, as if he had performed this act before, in another life. The feeling disturbed him, yet he couldn't shake it. "Where can I take her?" he asked the crowd, his voice softer now. A small voice answered, "The church by the river." It was Lily, the golden-haired child who had been crying. "That's where we live." Ethan nodded, carefully adjusting his hold on Eleanor. As he turned to leave, Sullivan's voice called after him, "Don't get too comfortable here, Donovan. Copper Creek doesn't take kindly to troublemakers." Ethan didn't look back, but his shoulders tensed slightly as he carried Eleanor away from the marketplace, following the small girl toward the river that curved around the edge of town, a river that seemed to call to him with each step, like an old friend with a dangerous secret. The river glimmered under moonlight, its surface rippling with silver patterns that seemed to tell stories to those patient enough to listen. Ethan Donovan stood at the window of his small room at the local boarding house, watching the water flow, feeling an inexplicable pull toward it. Sleep had eluded him, chased away by dreams that felt more like memories, fragments of another life that dissolved like mist when he tried to grasp them. In his dream, he had been younger, a boy, or really, no more than 17. He sat beside a river much like this one, fishing with a man whose face remained in shadow. The man's voice was warm, comforting. "The trout are biting today, Noah," the man had said, and the name had felt right, like a well-worn glove. Noah, the name echoed in Ethan's mind even now, though he couldn't understand why. He had been Ethan Donovan for as long as he could remember, a drifter, a man with no permanent ties, no family, no home. The dream had shifted suddenly, as dreams often do, dark clouds gathering overhead. The man's voice again, urgent this time. "The flood is coming sooner than we thought. We need to head back." But they had lingered too long. Something about gold being discovered upstream, the excitement in the air. Then the roar of water, a wall of fury crashing down the river valley. The desperate scramble up the bank, a hand reaching for him, missing. The sensation of being swept away, tumbling in the merciless current. And a woman's voice screaming a name, Noah, always Noah. Ethan shuddered, turning away from the window. His hand moved unconsciously to his left arm, tracing the half-moon scar that curved just below his shoulder. He didn't know how he'd gotten it, another blank space in the patchwork of his memories. From his coat pocket, he withdrew an old pocket watch. The gold was tarnished, the glass cracked. The hands had stopped at 3:17, as if time itself had frozen in that moment. Ethan didn't know where the watch had come from or why he kept it. He only knew that it was important, perhaps the only link to a past he couldn't remember. He turned the watch over in his palm, his thumb brushing over the initials engraved on the back, JW. They meant nothing to him, yet he treasured this object above all others. A knock at his door startled him from his reverie. "Mr. Donovan?" The innkeeper's voice was hesitant. "There's a lady here to see you. Says she's the doctor." Ethan tucked the watch away and opened the door to find a woman with auburn hair pulled back in a practical knot. Her brown eyes were sharp, intelligent, assessing him with a professional detachment that didn't quite hide her curiosity. "I'm Grace Mitchell," she said without preamble. "I wanted to thank you for what you did for Eleanor Walsh today." "I just did what anyone should have done," Ethan replied, wondering why she had sought him out. "But no one else did," Grace pointed out, her tone softening slightly. "That's why I'm here. Eleanor would like to thank you personally, if you're willing to come to the church tomorrow." Ethan hesitated. Something about the older woman had unsettled him deeply, stirred memories or feelings he couldn't identify. Yet he felt drawn to her, and to the church by the river. "I'll come," he said finally. Grace nodded, seeming relieved. "The children are curious about you too, especially Lily. She's quite taken with her hero." "I'm no hero," Ethan said automatically. Grace studied him for a moment, as if seeing something beneath his words. "Sometimes heroes don't know what they are until someone else names them." She turned to leave, then paused. "The river's beautiful tonight, isn't it? Almost makes you forget how dangerous it can be." After she left, Ethan returned to the window. The river continued its eternal journey, silver black in the moonlight. Beautiful and dangerous, like memories long buried, now threatening to resurface. As he watched the flowing water, Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that he hadn't come to Copper Creek by accident. Something or someone had called him here. And whether he liked it or not, the river would not let him leave until it had revealed its secrets. Morning came with the scent of sage and dust, the sun climbing over the eastern mountains to bathe Copper Creek in golden light. Ethan made his way toward the old church, following the curve of the river that seemed both stranger and more familiar with each passing moment. He found the church nestled in a small grove of cottonwoods, its weathered wooden steeple listing slightly to one side. The building had seen better days, the white paint peeling, the steps worn smooth by years of faithful feet. Yet there was a warmth to it, a sense of sanctuary that even time and neglect couldn't diminish. Children's laughter drifted through the open door, a sound so at odds with the tension of the previous day that Ethan paused to listen. Pure, innocent joy, rare enough in this harsh land to be worth savoring. As he climbed the steps, a small figure darted out the door and nearly collided with him. It was Lily, her golden hair catching the sunlight, her blue eyes widening at the sight of him. "You came," she exclaimed, delight spreading across her face. "I told Miss Eleanor you would, but she wasn't sure." "I said I would," Ethan replied simply. Lily beamed and reached for his hand with the unquestioning trust of childhood. "Come meet everyone." She pulled him inside, where the church's interior was a study in contrasts. The sanctuary remained mostly intact, with rows of wooden pews facing an altar adorned with wildflowers. But the side rooms had been converted into living spaces, with cots and makeshift curtains, providing what little privacy was possible for the orphans who called this place home. Eleanor Walsh sat in a rocking chair near a window, sunlight illuminating her silver hair like a halo. Despite her ordeal, she sat straight-backed, her hands busy with mending. When she saw Ethan, her needle paused mid-stitch, and that strange look of recognition flashed across her face again before she composed herself. "Mr. Donovan," she said, her voice stronger than he expected, "I wanted to thank you properly for your kindness yesterday." "No need for thanks, ma'am," Ethan replied, suddenly uncomfortable under her steady gaze. Those eyes, why did they seem to see right through him? "There's always need for gratitude in a world that often lacks it," Eleanor said gently. "Please sit." As Ethan took a seat on a nearby bench, children of various ages drifted into the room, eyeing him with undisguised curiosity. Lily proudly introduced each one: Thomas and Sarah, the 8-year-old twins with matching gap-toothed smiles; Margaret, solemn and shy at 6; William, sturdy and protective at 14. Last came a boy of about 12, who remained in the doorway, arms crossed defensively over his thin chest. Unlike the others, his face bore no welcoming expression, only suspicion and a hint of hostility. "That's Joshua," Lily whispered loudly. "He doesn't like strangers." Ethan nodded, understanding the boy's wariness. He recognized the look, had worn it himself more times than he could count. "Smart boy," he said, meeting Joshua's gaze directly. "Strangers can be dangerous." Instead of softening the boy's demeanor, his words seemed to harden it further. Joshua's eyes narrowed, and a jagged scar running from his right temple to his cheekbone became more pronounced as his face tightened. "The last stranger who came to Copper Creek killed my father," Joshua said flatly. "So excuse me if I don't welcome you with open arms, mister." Before Ethan could respond, Grace Mitchell entered from a side room, wiping her hands on a cloth. Her presence immediately shifted the tension in the air. "Joshua," she said quietly, "would you please help William bring in more water? The basin's nearly empty." The boy hesitated, then nodded curtly and left with the older child. Grace watched him go with a mix of concern and sympathy. "His father was a miner," she explained to Ethan once Joshua was out of earshot. "There was an accident in the mine last year. At least, that's the official story." "And the unofficial story?" Ethan asked, catching her tone. Grace glanced at Eleanor, who nodded slightly, giving permission to continue. "His father spoke out against the Western Pacific Railroad's plans for Copper Creek. A week later, a support beam in the mine happened to fail right above his work area." "Western Pacific Railroad?" Ethan repeated, a strange chill running down his spine at the name. "They want to run tracks through Copper Creek," Eleanor said, her voice hardening slightly. "Marshall Sullivan works for them, unofficially, of course. He's been encouraging people to sell their land." "Encouraging?" Ethan raised an eyebrow. "Threats, fines, arrests on trumped-up charges," Grace elaborated. "What happened to Eleanor yesterday wasn't about a loaf of bread. It was about her land." "This church sits on the most valuable property in the valley," Eleanor explained. "It has river access and a natural pathway through the hills, perfect for a railroad. I've refused to sell, just as my husband did before me." Wow. Something in her words triggered a flash of memory in Ethan, a man's voice, firm and principled. "This land isn't just dirt and rocks, Noah. It's our legacy. Some things are worth more than gold." The memory was gone as quickly as it came, leaving Ethan disoriented. He covered his confusion by asking, "Your husband is gone then?" A shadow passed across Eleanor's face. "Joseph died 15 years ago. They said it was fever, but—" She trailed off, her fingers unconsciously twisting her wedding ring. "And then the flood took our son," she continued after a moment, her voice softer now. "Noah was 17, strong, kind-hearted. Everyone said I should accept that he drowned, but a mother knows. I've always believed he survived somehow, somewhere." The name struck Ethan like a physical blow. Noah, the same name from his dreams. It could be coincidence, of course, but the timing, 15 years, matched the earliest memories he could clearly recall. Before he could pursue this unsettling connection, a commotion outside drew their attention. Joshua burst through the door, his face pale. "Sullivan's men are coming," he announced breathlessly. "They're headed this way with tools and stakes. They're saying something about surveying the property for the railroad." Eleanor rose from her chair, a flash of fear crossing her face before settling into determined resignation. "It's starting again," she murmured. "They never give up." Grace moved quickly to gather the younger children, ushering them toward the back of the church. Ethan found himself moving to the door, a protective instinct rising within him that felt both foreign and entirely natural. Outside, three men on horseback approached the church, the sun glinting off the badge on the lead rider's chest, one of Sullivan's deputies. Behind them rode two others carrying surveying equipment. "Stay inside," Ethan told Eleanor, his voice taking on a hardness that hadn't been there before. "I'll handle this." As he stepped onto the porch to meet the unwelcome visitors, Ethan was struck by the strange sense that he had stood in this exact spot before, defending this very threshold. The feeling was so powerful that for a moment, he could almost see a younger version of himself standing beside a tall man with kind eyes, a memory that couldn't possibly be his, yet felt more real than anything else in his fractured past. The confrontation at the church had ended without violence, but not without tension. Ethan had stood his ground, informing Sullivan's men that they had no legal right to survey private property without the owner's permission. They had backed down, but not before the deputy warned that Marshal Sullivan would hear about this interference. Now, as evening painted the sky in shades of amber and gold, Ethan found himself working alongside William and Joshua, repairing the church's leaking roof. Despite his initial hostility, Joshua had grudgingly accepted Ethan's help, though he remained watchful, as if expecting betrayal at any moment. Hammering the last shingle into place, Ethan sat back on his heels, surveying their work with satisfaction. The physical labor had been a welcome distraction from the questions swirling in his mind, questions about Eleanor Walsh, about Noah, about his own fragmented past. "Not bad," William commented, wiping sweat from his brow. "Hasn't been fixed properly since before the flood." "The flood?" Ethan asked, trying to sound casual. "The same one that took Mrs. Walsh's son?" Joshua, who had been collecting tools, paused. "Everybody knows about the Great Flood," he said. "Swept away half the valley 15 years ago. They say the river ran red for days afterward." Ethan's hand unconsciously moved to the scar on his arm, a gesture that didn't escape Joshua's notice. "How'd you get that?" the boy asked bluntly, nodding toward the half-moon mark. "I don't know," Ethan admitted. "Had it as long as I can remember." "Which is how long exactly?" Joshua pressed, his young face suddenly shrewd. Ethan hesitated. "About 15 years," he said finally. "Everything before that is unclear." Joshua and William exchanged glances, a silent communication passing between them. Before they could question him further, Grace appeared at the base of the ladder. "Dinner's ready," she called up. "Eleanor insists you join us, Mr. Donovan. A small thank you for your help today." Inside, the church had been transformed. Candles illuminated the long table that had been set in the sanctuary, their warm glow creating an almost reverent atmosphere. The orphans, cleaned up and in their best clothes, sat along both sides, with Eleanor at the head. The meal was simple, rabbit stew, cornbread, and early summer greens, but prepared with care. As they ate, Ethan found himself drawn into the easy rhythms of this makeshift family. The children, having decided he was an ally, peppered him with questions about his travels. Only when Lily asked innocently, "Did you have a family somewhere, Mr. Donovan?" did the comfortable atmosphere falter. "Lily," Eleanor gently admonished, "that's a personal question." It's all right, Ethan said. I don't mind. He turned to Lily's expectant face. The truth is, I don't know. I can't remember much before 15 years ago. What happened 15 years ago? Sarah, one of the twins, asked. Ethan shrugged, uncomfortable with the attention now centered on him. I was found half drowned by a riverbank. A trading caravan picked me up. The first clear memory I have is waking up in their camp with this. He touched the scar on his arm. A strange silence fell over the table. Eleanor had gone very still, her spoon frozen halfway to her lips. Her eyes, when they met Ethan's, held such intense hope and fear that he had to look away. After dinner, as the children helped clear the table, Ethan wandered into a small side room that served as Eleanor's private quarters. A painting hanging on the wall caught his attention. A family portrait of a man, a woman, and a teenage boy standing by a river. The man stood tall and proud, with kind eyes and a steady gaze. The woman was a younger Eleanor, her hair still brown, her face unlined by grief. And the boy, Ethan moved closer, drawn by a sense of familiarity so profound it made his heart race. The boy had his mother's eyes and his father's build. He stood between his parents, one hand resting on his father's shoulder, the other holding what looked like a fishing rod. That was painted just before Joseph died. Eleanor's voice came from behind him. He wanted a portrait of us together by the river he loved so much. Ethan turned to find her standing in the doorway, her expression unreadable in the dim light. Your husband and son? He asked, though he already knew the answer. Eleanor nodded, moving to stand beside him. Joseph and Noah, she said softly. My whole world. Ethan studied the painted face of Joseph Walsh, feeling a strange connection to this man he had never met. Or had he? How did your husband die? He asked. Eleanor's hands tightened in the folds of her skirt. Officially, it was fever, but Joseph was never sick a day in his life until, she paused, seeming to waver her words carefully, until he discovered something about Marshall Sullivan and the man he worked for even then, Preston Hayes of the Western Pacific Railroad. What did he discover? Ethan pressed gently. Evidence of a massacre, Eleanor whispered, glancing toward the door to ensure they weren't overheard. Of native people who lived in the valley north of here. Hayes wanted their land for the railroad, and when they wouldn't leave, she shook her head, unable to continue. Joseph was going to expose them, Ethan guessed. He kept a journal with names, dates, locations. The day before he planned to take it to the federal authorities, he collapsed at dinner. By morning, he was gone. Her voice cracked slightly. 3 months later, the flood took Noah too, or so I believed until yesterday. The implication hung in the air between them. Ethan felt a cold weight settle in his stomach. Mrs. Walsh, he began carefully. You don't think... I know what it sounds like, she interrupted. A grieving old woman seeing ghosts. But when I looked into your eyes in the marketplace, Noah had his father's build, but my eyes, just like yours. She reached out as if to touch his face, then let her hand fall away. I'm sorry, you must think I've lost my mind. No, Ethan said honestly. I don't think that at all. He wanted to say more, to tell her about his dreams, about the name that haunted him. But the weight of her hope was too much to bear when he had nothing but fragments to offer. Instead, he gently changed the subject. The painting, it's beautiful. Who was the artist? Relief flickered across Eleanor's face at his tactful retreat. Grace's father, actually. Dr. Mitchell was a man of many talents. He painted this just weeks before Joseph died. Dr. Mitchell, Ethan repeated. Grace mentioned he passed away too. 3 years ago, Eleanor confirmed. Another sudden illness in a man who was never sick. Her meaning was clear. Outside, the last light had faded from the sky, the first stars appearing like distant beacons. Ethan felt the pull of the river again, a restless urging he couldn't explain. I should go, he said. Thank you for dinner and for... He gestured vaguely, not knowing how to express gratitude for glimpses into a past that might be his own. Eleanor walked him to the door, the children having already been tucked into bed. At the threshold, she hesitated, then spoke in a rush, as if afraid she might lose her courage. Will you come back tomorrow? The roof still needs work, and the children, they've taken a shine to you. Even Joshua? Ethan asked with a slight smile. Especially Joshua, though he'd never admit it. Eleanor said. That boy needs someone to show him that not all men abandon those they care about. As Ethan walked back toward town, following the silver ribbon of the river in the moonlight, Eleanor's words echoed in his mind. Not all men abandon those they care about. Had he abandoned someone? Or been abandoned himself? He reached into his pocket, his fingers closing around the old pocket watch. J.W. Joseph Walsh? The possibility was too precise to be coincidence, yet too fantastic to be real. Stopping at the riverbank, Ethan sat on a large rock and watched the water flow past, steady and eternal. The half-moon reflected on the surface, curved like the scar on his arm. A quiet footstep alerted him to another presence. He turned to find Grace Mitchell standing a few yards away, her medical bag in hand. "I thought I might find you here," she said. "I often come to the river when I need to think." "Something about moving water clears the mind," Ethan agreed, making room for her on the rock. She sat beside him, her eyes on the flowing river. "Or perhaps it simply reminds us that nothing stays the same, not even memories." Her words struck uncomfortably close to his thoughts. "What do you mean?" Grace was silent for a moment, choosing her words with care. "My father kept detailed journals of his medical practice. I've been reading them since his death, trying to understand certain things. Like why so many healthy people suddenly died in Copper Creek," Ethan suggested. She glanced at him sharply. "Yes, and other things." She hesitated, then asked, "That scar on your arm, may I see it?" Ethan rolled up his sleeve, revealing the half-moon mark. Grace examined it with professional detachment, though her fingers trembled slightly as they traced its outline. "How did you get this?" she asked. "I don't know," Ethan admitted. "The traders who found me said I already had it." "These traders, they took care of you?" Ethan's expression darkened. "Not exactly. They saw a strong young man with no memory and no family. I was useful to them. For a while." Grace's eyes softened with understanding. "Until you escaped?" "Until I grew strong enough to leave," Ethan corrected. "Why all these questions about my scar?" Grace reached into her bag and withdrew a small leather-bound book. "Because my father described treating a young man with an identical mark 15 years ago. A young man pulled half dead from the river after the Great Flood." Ethan's heart hammered against his ribs. "Who was he?" "According to my father's journal," Grace said slowly, "it was Noah Walsh, Eleanor's son." The revelation hung in the night air, as tangible as the mist rising from the river. Ethan felt as though the ground had shifted beneath him, reality altering to accommodate this new truth. Yet even as his mind rebelled against the possibility, something deeper, something buried in blood and bone, recognized the rightness of it. "Why wouldn't your father have returned him to Eleanor?" Ethan asked, his voice rough with emotion he couldn't name. Grace's face shadowed with shame and anger. "That's what I've been trying to understand." The journal entry stops abruptly with a note that Marshal Sullivan came to see him that night. The next entry, days later, simply states that the young man had been sent away for his own safety. My father never mentioned him again. "Sent away," Ethan repeated. "To a trading caravan, perhaps?" "Perhaps," Grace agreed. "The timing matches." Ethan stood abruptly, needing movement to process the implications. I can't just... "I know it's overwhelming," Grace said, rising to stand beside him. "But if you are Noah Walsh, then Sullivan and this Hayes person had my father killed," Ethan finished, a cold anger settling in his chest, "and made sure I disappeared before I could inherit my father's land. Land that now stands between Western Pacific Railroad and their direct route through the valley," Grace added. "Land that Eleanor has refused to sell, even under threat." Ethan paced along the riverbank, fragments of memory surfacing like debris in floodwaters. The man in his dreams, Joseph Walsh, the pocket watch with the initials J.W., the sense of familiarity when he first saw Eleanor. It was all too much, yet somehow not enough to form a complete picture. "I need time to think," he said finally. "This could all be coincidence. The scar, the timing." "But you don't believe that," Grace observed quietly. No, he didn't. Deep down, Ethan, or Noah, knew that he had found more than just another dusty town in Copper Creek. He had found the beginning of his story, the source of the river that had carried him away from himself for 15 long years. As he stood on the banks where that journey might have begun, watching the moonlight dance across the water, Ethan made a silent promise. Whether he was Noah Walsh or not, he would protect Eleanor and the children from Sullivan and his railroad masters. And perhaps, in doing so, he might finally discover who he truly was. The lamp burned low in Grace's small office at the back of what had once been her father's medical practice. Outside, Copper Creek slept under a blanket of stars, the occasional distant coyote called the only sound to break the night's stillness. Ethan sat across from Grace, the doctor's journal open between them on the worn oak desk. They had spent hours poring over Dr. Mitchell's meticulous notes, searching for any detail that might confirm or disprove the incredible possibility that Ethan Donovan was, in fact, Noah Walsh. Here, Grace said, her finger tracing a line of faded ink. This entry from May 8, 1870. Pulled young man from river today after flash flood. Unconscious, suffering exposure, large splinter wound to left arm in distinctive crescent shape. Removed wood fragment, cleaned and stitched wound. Patient delirious, repeating name Eleanor, and clutching a pocket watch. Ethan's hand moved unconsciously to his coat pocket, where the old timepiece rested. He had shown it to Grace earlier, and they had both stared in silent shock at the initials JW engraved on its back. The next few entries detail your recovery, Grace continued, turning the page. Fever, confusion, partial memory loss. My father was concerned about potential brain injury from oxygen deprivation. That would explain why I don't remember anything clearly before waking with the caravan, Ethan said quietly. Grace nodded, then frowned as she reached the entry dated May 15th. Then this, Sullivan visited tonight. Insists Walsh boy must be sent away for his own protection. Claims Eleanor unstable with grief, unable to care for injured son. Something feels wrong about his concern. When I suggested official channels for the boy's welfare, Sullivan grew threatening. He didn't want me returned to Eleanor, Ethan concluded, the cold anger he'd felt earlier returning with renewed intensity. But why force your father to give me to traitors? Why not just... He didn't finish the thought, but Grace understood. Kill you, she supplied grimly. Perhaps even Sullivan had limits then. Or perhaps he thought being sold to traitors was a fate cruel enough for a privileged young man. And with Noah gone, Eleanor would be alone, more vulnerable to pressure about selling the land, Ethan added, the pieces falling into place with terrible clarity. Grace turned the page, revealing the final entry about the young flood victim. Made arrangements with Carson Trading Company to take the boy east. Sullivan paid them well for their discretion. May God forgive me for my part in this deception. I have no choice if I wish to protect my own daughter. She closed the journal, her hands shaking slightly. My father was being blackmailed, she whispered. I never knew. Ethan reached across the desk, covering her trembling hand with his own. He was protecting you, Grace. Any father would do the same. But at what cost? She asked bitterly. Eleanor's son, her last piece of family. They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of past betrayals and present revelations hanging heavy between them. Then Grace straightened, her professional composure returning as she opened a drawer and withdrew another, smaller journal. There's more, she said. This journal is from 3 years ago, just before my father died. He writes about discovering something concerning Joseph Walsh's death. She opened to a marked page and read aloud, reviewing old case notes on J. Walsh death. Symptoms consistent with arsenic poisoning. Not fever as I certified. Pressure from Sullivan clouded my judgment then, but I can remain silent no longer. Have written to Federal Marshal in Denver. The letter was never sent, Ethan guessed. Grace nodded grimly. My father died the next day. Heart failure, according to the doctor Sullivan brought in from the next town. Her voice broke slightly. I wasn't even allowed to examine him. Sullivan silenced him, Ethan said, the words falling like stones in the quiet room. Just like he silenced Joseph Walsh. And tried to silence you, Grace added, by erasing Noah Walsh from existence. Ethan rose from his chair, needing to move as thoughts and half-memories churned within him. The more he learned, the more certain he became that Grace's theory was correct. He was Noah Walsh, son of Joseph and Eleanor, heir to the land that Western Pacific Railroad coveted so desperately. Yet even as this truth solidified, another, more troubling question emerged. Why hadn't he remembered any of this sooner? 15 years was a long time, but to forget one's own mother, one's own name. There's something else, Grace said, interrupting his troubled thoughts. Something that might explain why you haven't remembered until now. She hesitated, as if unsure how to proceed. Ethan returned to his seat, bracing himself for whatever revelation came next. My father's last entry mentions a conversation he overheard between Sullivan and someone named Hayes. Preston Hayes, I presume. They were discussing a problem in Silver Ridge, a young man who had started asking questions about land acquisitions there. Silver Ridge, Ethan repeated, the name sending an unexpected chill down his spine. Yes, does that mean something to you? Ethan frowned, trying to grasp at memories that skittered away like minnows in shallow water. I spent time in Silver Ridge about 2 years ago. There was trouble there. I can't quite remember the details. According to what my father overheard, Hayes was concerned this young man, described as tall, with unusual gray-blue eyes, was investigating improper land deals related to the railroad. Sullivan suggested they handle it permanently. Ethan's blood ran cold. Are you saying Hayes and Sullivan tried to have me killed again? I'm saying you may have crossed paths with them before, without realizing who they were to you, Grace said carefully. And something happened in Silver Ridge, something traumatic enough that it might explain why certain memories remain blocked. She leaned forward, her expression earnest. Ethan, I've studied brain injuries. Sometimes the mind protects itself from trauma by sealing away memories that are too painful. If you were injured again in Silver Ridge, it would explain the gaps in my more recent memories, Ethan finished, unconsciously touching a thin scar at his hairline. I've always attributed those to drinking too much. But what if, he trailed off, disturbed by the implication that his entire identity, even his memories of the past few years, might be compromised. If he had been Noah Walsh, then become Ethan Donovan, who exactly was he now? We need to tell Eleanor, Grace said after a moment. She has a right to know her son might be alive. No, Ethan said quickly, not yet, not until I'm certain. I can't give her that hope, only to take it away again if I'm wrong. But the evidence is circumstantial, Ethan interrupted. A scar, a watch, a missing young man, it's not enough. I need to remember, Grace. I need to know for myself who I am before I claim to be someone's long-lost son. Grace studied him for a long moment, then nodded reluctantly. I understand, but promise me you'll be careful. If Sullivan realizes who you might be. He's already suspicious, Ethan acknowledged. I'll need to watch my back. As they prepared to leave, Ethan paused, a thought occurring to him. This Hayes person, is he still involved with the railroad? Preston Hayes owns Western Pacific now, Grace said. He's one of the most powerful men in the territory. They say he's coming to Copper Creek next week to personally oversee the final land acquisitions for the new route. Ethan absorbed this information with grim satisfaction. If Hayes was coming to Copper Creek, it would provide an opportunity to observe the man, perhaps even trigger more memories. One way or another, Ethan was determined to uncover the truth about his past and about the men who had apparently gone to such lengths to bury it. As they stepped outside into the pre-dawn chill, the eastern sky just beginning to lighten with promise of another day, Ethan felt both unsettled and strangely liberated. For years, he had drifted without purpose, without roots, without a true sense of self. Now at least he had questions worth answering, and perhaps a family worth finding. The river's voice called to him from the edge of town, a constant reminder of the journey that had brought him to this moment. Whether that journey had begun 15 years ago when a boy named Noah was swept away by floodwaters, or more recently when a man called Ethan had wandered into Copper Creek, he could not yet say with certainty. But as he walked beside Grace in the growing light, Ethan felt for the first time in memory that he was heading in the right direction. Toward home, toward truth, toward the person he was meant to be. The following days settled into an unexpected routine. Ethan spent his mornings helping repair the church, his afternoons teaching the older boys basic carpentry, and his evenings by the river, searching his fractured memories for any confirmation that he was indeed Noah Walsh. On this particular evening, the setting sun painted Copper Creek in hues of amber and gold as Ethan made his way through the shadows toward the marshal's office. With most of the town gathered at the saloon or headed home for supper, The main street was nearly deserted, the perfect opportunity for what he had in mind. The marshal's office sat dark and silent, Sullivan having departed hours earlier for his usual evening meal at the hotel restaurant. Ethan knew he had perhaps 30 minutes before the lawman returned. Not much time to search for evidence, but it would have to be enough. The lock on the back door surrendered easily to Ethan's practiced touch, a skill he couldn't remember acquiring but executed with troubling proficiency. The door swung open with the faintest creak, revealing the office's shadowy interior. Inside, the familiar scents of tobacco, gun oil, and cheap whiskey hung in the still air. Ethan moved silently toward Sullivan's desk, carefully lighting a small lantern that cast just enough illumination to see without being visible from outside. The desk's surface held little of interest: wanted posters, routine correspondence, a half-empty bottle of rye. Ethan turned his attention to the drawers, methodically searching each one. The bottom drawer was locked, but yielded to his pocket knife after a moment's work. Inside, he found what he was looking for: a stack of letters bearing the Western Pacific Railroad letterhead, each signed with the bold, slashing signature of Preston Hayes. Ethan scanned them quickly, his jaw tightening as he absorbed their contents. The earliest letters outlined the initial plan for the railroad's expansion through Copper Creek, with specific mention of the Walsh property as a necessary acquisition. Later correspondence revealed growing frustration as Eleanor continued to refuse all offers. The most recent letter, dated just a week earlier, carried a more ominous tone. "Sullivan, my patience wears thin. The Walsh woman has been an impediment for too long. I arrive on the 15th and expect this matter to be resolved by then. If legal means have failed, other methods must be employed. The railroad will have that land one way or another. Remember our arrangement. Your future depends on your usefulness. P. Hayes." The 15th, just 3 days away. The threat was unmistakable, as was the hold Hayes seemed to have over Sullivan. Ethan carefully returned the letter to its place, his mind racing with implications. Whatever arrangement existed between the two men, it clearly gave Hayes leverage to demand increasingly extreme measures. Continuing his search, Ethan discovered a rolled map tucked behind the filing cabinet. Spreading it on the desk, he found himself looking at a detailed survey of Copper Creek in the surrounding valley. Red markings indicated properties already acquired by the railroad, while those still holding out were circled in black. The Walsh property, the church, and surrounding land was prominently marked with a heavy black circle and the notation, "Priority target, E. Walsh widow." Nearby, a smaller notation caught Ethan's eye: "Previous owner J. Walsh, deceased, 1870. The clinical documentation of his father's death, if Joseph Walsh was indeed his father, sent a cold wave of anger through Ethan. To these men, lives were merely obstacles to be removed, families to be broken for profit and progress. As he studied the map further, Ethan noticed something odd: a section of land north of town, marked with cross-hatched lines and the notation Site 23 restricted. There was no indication of what made this area special or restricted, but the location corresponded roughly with where Eleanor had said the native settlement had once stood, the people Hayes and Sullivan had allegedly massacred. A sudden noise from the street outside jerked Ethan's attention away from the map. Through the window, he caught sight of Sullivan returning earlier than expected, already dismounting from his horse in front of the office. Quickly rolling the map and returning it to its hiding place, Ethan extinguished the lantern and slipped toward the back door. He was halfway out when a movement in the shadows of the storeroom caught his eye. Another person, crouched in the corner. For a tense moment, Ethan and the hidden figure stared at each other in the darkness. Then recognition dawned, along with disbelief. "Joshua?" Ethan whispered incredulously. The boy's eyes were wide with fear and defiance. Before either could speak further, the jingle of keys sounded at the front door. Ethan grabbed Joshua's arm and pulled him through the back entrance, just as Sullivan's boots hit the porch steps. They ran silently through the alley and didn't stop until they reached the cover of a stable 2 streets away, both breathing hard from the narrow escape. "What the hell were you doing in there?" Ethan demanded once he'd caught his breath. Joshua's chin jutted stubbornly. "I could ask you the same thing. I'm not a 12-year-old boy sneaking around a killer's office after dark," Ethan countered, his voice sharp with residual fear for the child's safety. Something in his tone must have reached Joshua, because the boy's defiance crumbled slightly. I've been watching Sullivan, he admitted, for months now, gathering evidence. Evidence of what? That he killed my father. Joshua's voice held a mature determination that was heartbreaking in one so young. Everyone says it was an accident in the mine, but it wasn't. My father found something about Sullivan and Hayes and what they did years ago. Ethan felt a chill that had nothing to do with the evening air. What did your father find, Joshua? The boy hesitated, weighing his trust. Then, he found graves in the hills north of town, mass graves with native people, women and children too. He was a surveyor for the mining company, checking a new site. He wasn't supposed to be in that area, but he got lost and stumbled on them. Ethan thought of the restricted area marked on Sullivan's map. Site 23? Joshua's eyes widened. You know about it? I saw it marked on a map in Sullivan's office. Did your father tell anyone what he found? The boy's face darkened with grief and fury. He told Marshal Sullivan, thinking he'd investigate. A week later, my father was dead. Mining accident. The bitterness in the young voice was palpable. I'm sorry, Joshua, Ethan said softly. Truly. I don't want your sorry, the boy replied, though without his usual hostility. I want justice. Sullivan has to pay for what he did, to my father and to those people in the graves. Ethan studied the determined young face, recognizing a righteous anger that mirrored his own growing fury at the injustices surrounding Copper Creek. You're right, he said finally, but getting yourself killed won't bring justice to anyone. Promise me you won't go back to Sullivan's office alone. Joshua looked away, reluctant to make such a promise. I mean it, Ethan pressed. I'm investigating too. We can help each other, but only if you stay alive to do it. The boy considered this proposition, then nodded slowly. Fine, but you have to tell me what you find. Deal, Ethan agreed, offering his hand. After a moment's hesitation, Joshua shook it, the first real gesture of trust between them. As they walked back toward the church, keeping to the shadows, Joshua said quietly, There's something else you should know about Joseph Walsh. Ethan's step faltered slightly at the name. What about him? My father knew him, said he was a good man who stood up to Hayes when nobody else would. Joshua kicked at a stone in their path. The night before my father died, he told me something strange. He said, history repeats itself in Copper Creek. Walsh tried to warn everyone about Hayes and paid with his life. Now I'm doing the same. The words hung in the night air, a ghostly echo linking past and present. Ethan felt the weight of them settle on his shoulders, along with a growing certainty about the path forward. Whether he was Noah Walsh or not, he was now part of this story, this cycle of injustice that had claimed too many lives already. Your father was brave, Ethan told Joshua. So are you. But brave doesn't mean reckless. Promise me you'll be careful. The boy nodded, a little straighter in his posture now. As they approached the church, light spilled from its windows like a beacon in the gathering darkness. Inside, Eleanor and the children were safe for now, unaware of the threats marshaling against them. Ethan resolved to keep it that way for as long as possible. Hayes was coming, bringing with him the storm that had been brewing for 15 years. When it broke, Ethan would be ready, not just for his own sake, but for all of them. Morning dawned bright and clear, bringing with it the sounds of hammers and saws as Ethan and the older boys continued repairs on the church's roof. The work had progressed steadily over the past days, with even Joshua joining in without his usual reluctance. Their shared secret seemed to have forged an unexpected bond between man and boy. From his perch atop the roof, Ethan had a clear view of Copper Creek spreading below, the dusty main street, the cluster of buildings around the town square, and beyond, the silver ribbon of the river that had become his evening companion. In the distance, a cloud of dust marked the approach of riders from the east. Company coming, he called down to William, who was measuring lumber in the churchyard. Joshua scrambled up the ladder to join Ethan, shading his eyes against the morning glare. Sullivan, Mustalievan, he said flatly, recognizing the marshal's distinctive hat even at this distance, and his deputies, 4 of them. Ethan frowned. Sullivan rarely traveled with more than one deputy unless he anticipated trouble. Get inside, he told Joshua. Tell Miss Eleanor and Grace we have visitors. Make sure the little ones stay in the back rooms. The boy nodded and descended quickly, disappearing into the church. Ethan remained on the roof, continuing his work as though unaware of the approaching riders. though every muscle in his body had tensed in readiness. The hoofbeats slowed as Sullivan and his men reached the churchyard, dust settling around them in a thin cloud. Ethan glanced down casually, driving another nail into a shingle before acknowledging their presence. "Morning, Marshal," he called, his tone deliberately light. "Something I can help you with?" Sullivan's face, already ruddy from the morning sun, darkened further at Ethan's nonchalance. "You can come down from there, Donovan. We need to talk." Ethan hammered in one final nail, taking his time before climbing down the ladder to face the mounted men. He was acutely aware of his vulnerable position, outnumbered, with Eleanor and the children potentially in danger behind him. "What brings you and your reinforcements out this way?" Ethan asked, resting one hand casually on his belt, not far from the knife concealed at his waist. Sullivan dismounted, his spurs jingling as his boots hit the dirt. He was a large man, barrel-chested and imposing, with small eyes that never quite matched the false smile he now offered. "Just a friendly visit," Sullivan said, the words at odds with the tension radiating from him and his men. "Wanted to let Mrs. Walsh know we'll be having some distinguished company in town soon. Mr. Preston Hayes himself is coming to oversee the railroad's progress." "I'm sure Mrs. Walsh will be thrilled to hear it," Ethan replied dryly, "though I don't see why it required an armed escort to deliver the news." Sullivan's smile tightened. "These are dangerous times, Donovan. A man can't be too careful." He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Speaking of careful, I've been hearing things about you, asking questions around town, showing unusual interest in local history." "I find history fascinating," Ethan said evenly, "especially the parts people try to bury." The marshal's eyes narrowed, all pretense of friendliness evaporating. "Let me give you some advice, stranger. Copper Creek doesn't welcome troublemakers. Men who stir up the past tend to have unfortunate accidents." "Like Joshua's father?" Ethan suggested quietly. "Or Dr. Mitchell, or Joseph Walsh?" A flash of genuine surprise crossed Sullivan's face before he mastered it. "You've been listening to ghost stories, Donovan. This town has had its share of tragedies, like any other. Remarkably convenient tragedies for the Western Pacific Railroad," Ethan noted. Before Sullivan could respond, the church door opened and Eleanor emerged, her silver hair glinting in the sunlight, her posture straight and dignified despite the visible apprehension in her eyes. "Marshal Sullivan," she acknowledged coolly. "To what do we owe this intrusion?" Sullivan turned toward her, doffing his hat with exaggerated courtesy. "Mrs. Walsh, just passing along news that Mr. Hayes will be arriving soon. Thought you might want to reconsider his generous offer for your property before he gets here." "My answer remains the same," Eleanor said firmly. "This land is not for sale at any price." "That's a shame," Sullivan said, replacing his hat. "Mr. Hayes doesn't take disappointment well. He's determined to see this railroad built, and your land stands in the way of progress." "Progress," Eleanor repeated, the word bitter on her tongue. "Is that what you call it when you destroy homes and lives for profit?" A dangerous gleam appeared in Sullivan's eyes. "Careful, Mrs. Walsh. Even a grieving widow isn't above the law in Copper Creek." Ethan stepped between them, his voice level but carrying a clear warning. "I think you've delivered your message, Marshal. Mrs. Walsh has given her answer." For a tense moment, Sullivan's hand hovered near his holstered gun, and Ethan prepared himself for the worst. Then one of the deputies coughed nervously, breaking the spell. Sullivan backed away, mounting his horse with deliberate slowness. "Think about your future, Mrs. Walsh," he called down, "and the future of those orphans you've collected. Would be a shame if the county found this place unsuitable for children." With that parting threat, he wheeled his horse around and rode away, his deputies following in a cloud of dust. Ethan watched them go, committing to memory the faces of each man, noting who seemed reluctant and who seemed eager in their role as Sullivan's enforcers. Such details could matter later. Eleanor's hand on his arm startled him from these calculations. "You shouldn't antagonize him," she said quietly. "Sullivan is dangerous when cornered." "So am I," Ethan replied, surprised by the fierce protectiveness he felt toward this woman who might be his mother. "He won't threaten you or the children again. Not while I'm here." A complex emotion crossed Eleanor's face. Gratitude mingled with something deeper, more painful. "You remind me so much of—" She stopped, shaking her head. "Thank you, Mr. Donovan. Your help has been a blessing." From the doorway of the church, Grace watched their interaction with thoughtful eyes. When Eleanor went back inside, she approached Ethan, her voice low to avoid being overheard. "Sullivan knows something's different about you," she observed. "He's getting nervous." "Good," Ethan said grimly. "Nervous men make mistakes." Grace's expression grew troubled. "They also become more dangerous. Hayes arrives tomorrow, according to what I've heard in town. Whatever Sullivan has planned, it's coming to a head soon." Ethan nodded, his gaze drawn to the distant river gleaming in the morning sun. "I need to remember, Grace, everything, before Hayes gets here." "I might be able to help with that," Grace said hesitantly. "There are techniques, hypnosis, certain herbal preparations, that can sometimes access buried memories." "You've done this before?" "My father experimented with it for patients who had experienced trauma," she explained. "I assisted him several times. It's not without risks, though. Recovered memories can be overwhelming." Ethan considered this offer, weighing the potential benefits against the dangers. If he truly was Noah Walsh, recovering those memories might give him the edge needed to protect Eleanor and expose Hayes and Sullivan. Yet the thought of surrendering control, of diving into the darkness of his fractured past, filled him with instinctive dread. Before he could respond, a small figure darted out from behind the woodpile. Joshua, his young face tight with urgency. "Mr. Donovan," the boy said breathlessly. "Someone left this under a rock by the river path." He thrust forward a folded piece of paper. "It's got your name on it." Ethan took the note, scanning the hastily scrawled message. "Donovan, if you want the truth about Silver Twitch, meet me at Miller's abandoned mine at sundown. Come alone. I risked my neck once trying to help you. Don't make me regret trying again. A friend, Silver Ridge. The town Grace had mentioned, where something had happened to him 2 years ago. Something connected to Hayes and Sullivan. Something that might explain his memory loss." "Do you know who left this?" Ethan asked Joshua. The boy shook his head. "I was checking my fishing lines and saw a man leaving it. Didn't recognize him. Wore a duster and kept his hat pulled low." Grace read the note over Ethan's shoulder, her brow furrowing with concern. "This could be a trap. Or it could be the answers I need," Ethan countered. "I have to go." "Then I'm coming with you," Grace insisted. Ethan shook his head firmly. "The note says alone. Besides, I need you here with Eleanor and the children. If this is a diversion to leave them unprotected." Grace bit her lip, clearly torn between multiple concerns. "At least take this," she said finally, pressing a small derringer into his hand. "It was my father's. Only 2 shots, but better than nothing if things go wrong." Ethan tucked the small gun into his boot, oddly moved by her concern. "I'll be careful," he promised, "and I'll be back by morning." As Grace returned to her duties inside the church, Joshua lingered, his young face unusually solemn. "Mr. Donovan," he said quietly, "if you don't come back, what should we do?" The simple question carried the weight of the boy's experience. He had already lost his father to the dangers surrounding Copper Creek, and now feared losing this new protector as well. Ethan crouched to meet Joshua at eye level. "If I'm not back by sunrise," he said seriously, "get everyone to Grace's office in town. It's made of brick, more defensible. Then send William to telegraph the federal marshal in Denver. The address is in Grace's desk." Joshua nodded, absorbing these instructions with the gravity of someone much older. "I'll look after them," he promised, "like you looked after us." Ethan placed a hand on the boy's shoulder, feeling an unexpected surge of pride. "I know you will." As Joshua ran back to his chores, Ethan turned his gaze toward the distant hills where Miller's abandoned mine lay waiting with its promises of answers, or ambush. The sun had begun its westward journey. In a few hours, it would be time to discover which. The afternoon passed with agonizing slowness as Ethan made preparations for his evening journey. He checked and rechecked Grace's small derringer, cleaned his knife, and packed minimal supplies in case he needed to remain away overnight. All the while, he felt Eleanor's watchful eyes, though she asked no questions about his obvious preparations. As the day waned, Ethan found himself drawn to the small room that served as Eleanor's personal quarters. The family portrait still hung on the wall, the painted faces of Joseph, Eleanor, and Noah Walsh looking out across 15 years of grief and separation. Standing before it, Ethan searched the young face of Noah for any confirmation of his suspicions. The resemblance was there, The same gray-blue eyes, the same set of the jaw. But was that enough? How could he be certain that his fragmented memories and strange familiarity with Eleanor weren't simply the product of a desperate desire to belong somewhere, to someone? He was 17 when that was painted. Eleanor's voice came softly from behind him, just like you were when the flood took you. Ethan turned to find her standing in the doorway, her hands clasped tightly before her, as if to stop them from reaching out to him. Mrs. Walsh, he began carefully. Please, she interrupted, her voice trembling slightly. I've seen how you look at that painting, how you touch that scar on your arm when you think no one is watching, how your eyes follow the river with such longing and fear. She took a hesitant step forward. I know who you are. I've known since the moment you stopped Sullivan in the marketplace. Ethan stood frozen, unable to confirm or deny what she was saying. How can you be so sure? He asked finally. I'm not even sure myself. Eleanor moved to a small trunk at the foot of her bed, opening it with reverent care. From inside, she withdrew a bundle wrapped in faded blue cloth. Because a mother knows her child, she said simply. She unwrapped the bundle to reveal a boy's jacket, carefully preserved. This was Noah's. He was wearing it the day of the flood. She held it out to him, and with hesitant hands, Ethan took the garment. The fabric was still sturdy despite its age, the stitching strong and even. As he turned it over, he noticed a small patch on the right sleeve, covering what must have been a tear. You sewed this patch, he said suddenly, the memory surfacing with unexpected clarity. I tore it climbing the big oak tree by the river. You were angry because it was my Sunday jacket. Eleanor's eyes filled with tears. Yes, she whispered. You climbed that tree 100 times without incident, but the one day you wore your good clothes. The memory expanded, filling with color and sound and emotion. Father, Joseph, he laughed and said boys would be boys. You tried to stay angry, but you couldn't help smiling too. Eleanor's hand flew to her mouth, a small sob escaping. Noah, she said, the name a prayer on her lips. The sound of his true name broke something open inside Ethan, or Noah, a floodgate of memories bursting forth after being damned for 15 years. The jacket slipped from his fingers as he pressed his palms to his temples, overwhelmed by the rush of images and emotions. His childhood in this very church, when it had been their family home. Fishing with his father in the river that had later nearly claimed his life. His mother's voice singing hymns on Sunday mornings. The taste of her apple pie, the comfort of her hand on his fevered brow when he was ill. And darker memories, his father's sudden death, the grief and confusion that followed. The whispered conversations between his mother and Dr. Mitchell, abruptly silenced when he entered the room. The growing fear as Sullivan and his men began pressuring landowners to sell. Then the flood, the roaring wall of water that had swept down the valley without warning, catching him as he checked the fishing traps. The desperate struggle to stay afloat, the branch that struck his head, the darkness that followed. Fragments of what came after, waking in pain. Doctor. Mitchell's concerned face, drifting in and out of consciousness. Then the traders, the years of hard labor, the gradual acceptance of a new identity as his old one faded like a dream upon waking. Ethan, no, Noah, sank to his knees, overcome by the weight of reclaimed memory. Eleanor knelt beside him, her arms encircling him as they had so many years ago. I remember, he choked out. Not everything, but enough. I remember you, Mother. They clung to each other, 15 years of separation collapsing in a moment of recognition that transcended time and trauma. Eleanor wept openly, her hands cupping his face as if to reassure herself that he was real, that her son had truly returned to her. When the initial storm of emotion had passed, Noah pulled back slightly, troubled by a new thought. Why didn't you tell me sooner, when I first arrived? Eleanor wiped away tears with a trembling hand. I wanted to, with every fiber of my being, but I was afraid. Afraid of what? Of Sullivan, she said, her voice hardening. If he knew you were alive, that you were Noah Walsh, he would stop at nothing to silence you, just as he silenced your father. Noah's brow furrowed with confusion. But why? What threat could I possibly pose to him? Eleanor rose and moved to the window, gazing out at the setting sun with eyes that seemed to look into the past. There's something I haven't told you, haven't told to anyone except Dr. Mitchell. Years ago. She turned back to face him, her expression resolute despite the tear tracks on her cheeks. Your father didn't just discover the massacre Hayes and Sullivan committed. He documented it. Names, dates, locations, everything needed to prove their guilt. The journal Grace mentioned, Noah said, rising to his feet. You have it? Eleanor shook her head. Not a journal, something more damning. Your father was no fool, Noah. He knew the danger of what he'd discovered, so he created insurance. She returned to the trunk, reaching deep inside to release a hidden compartment in its base. From this secret space, she withdrew a small wooden box, its surface worn smooth by years of handling. After Joseph died, I found this hidden beneath the floorboards of our bedroom, along with a letter explaining what it contained and what I should do if anything happened to him. She placed the box in Noah's hands. It was surprisingly heavy for its size. The lid sealed with wax impressed with the Walsh family crest, a river flowing beneath a bridge. Inside is your father's testimony about the massacre, along with a map showing the location of the mass graves. But more importantly, it contains something Hayes and Sullivan would kill to recover. Noah broke the wax seal and opened the box. Inside lay a folded document in a small leather pouch. He opened the document first, his father's detailed account of discovering Hayes and Sullivan executing native families to clear land for the railroad. The descriptions were methodical, dispassionate, all the more damning for their clinical precision. This alone would hang them both, Noah said grimly, refolding the paper. What's in the pouch? The reason they murdered your father, Eleanor replied. Look. Noah untied the pouch and tipped its contents into his palm. 3 gold rings fell out, each engraved with distinctive markings. I don't understand, he said, studying the unusual designs. Those belonged to the tribal leaders, Eleanor explained. Your father removed them from the bodies to prove their identities. One belonged to Chief Whitehawk, who had signed a federal treaty protecting his people's land, the same land Hayes wanted for his railroad. Understanding dawned on Noah's face. So this wasn't just murder. It was a violation of federal law, an act that could bring the army down on Hayes and Sullivan. Eleanor nodded. Joseph was going to take everything, his testimony, the rings, the map, to the federal authorities in Denver. The night before his planned departure, Sullivan came to our house, ostensibly to discuss buying our land. He must have somehow learned of Joseph's plans. And poisoned him that night, Noah finished, the pieces falling into place. With you and me as witnesses, though we didn't realize it at the time. Yes, Eleanor confirmed, her voice hollow with the memory. I served them both coffee. I watched my husband die by my own hand, never knowing until years later that I had been made the instrument of his murder. The anguish in her voice tore at Noah's heart. It wasn't your fault, Mother. Sullivan is the murderer, not you. I know that in my head, Eleanor said softly, but my heart has carried that burden for 15 years, along with the grief of losing you both. Noah carefully returned the rings and document to the box, securing its lid. Why not take these to the authorities after Father died? Why wait all these years? Eleanor's expression hardened with old determination. I tried. The local sheriff was in Hayes's pocket. The federal marshal who finally agreed to meet with me died in a robbery gone wrong on his way to Copper Creek. After that, I realized I needed to bide my time, to wait for the right moment, the right ally. She took his hand, her grip surprisingly strong. I never stopped fighting, Noah. I just learned to fight differently. By staying here, by refusing to sell, I kept Hayes and Sullivan from achieving their goal. And I kept faith that someday justice would find its way to our door. Noah looked down at their joined hands, his large and calloused from years of hard work, hers delicate but no less strong, marked with the small scars and creases of a life lived with purpose and courage. I'm going to Miller's mine tonight, he told her quietly. Someone claims to have information about what happened to me in Silver Ridge 2 years ago. A missing piece of my past that might be connected to Hayes. Fear flashed across Eleanor's face. It could be a trap. It could be, but Noah agreed. But it's a risk I have to take. There are still gaps in my memory, things I need to understand if we're going to stop Hayes and Sullivan. Eleanor studied him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. You have your father's determination, she said, pride mingling with concern, and his courage. She returned to the trunk once more and withdrew a revolver, well maintained despite its age. Take this. It was Joseph's. 6 shots, all good. Noah accepted the weapon, feeling its familiar weight in his hand. Another memory surfaced, his father teaching him to shoot, emphasizing that guns were tools of last resort, not first impulse. I'll come back, he promised, tucking the revolver into his belt. And when I do, we'll end this. Together. As the sun dipped toward the horizon, casting long shadows across the churchyard, Noah embraced his mother one final time before setting out toward Miller's abandoned mine. The truth of his identity now settled within him, not as a question, but as a foundation upon which to build his next actions. He was Noah Walsh, son of Joseph and Eleanor, heir to their courage and their cause. Whatever awaited him in the abandoned mine, he would face it with the strength of that knowledge and the determination to finally bring justice to Copper Creek. The abandoned Miller mine lay 4 miles north of Copper Creek, nestled in the foothills, where the valley began its gradual climb toward the mountains. As Noah approached on horseback, the setting sun cast long shadows across the entrance, making the weathered timbers of the mine's frame look like the ribs of some ancient beast. No one had worked this claim in nearly a decade, not since Old Man Miller had followed a promising vein of silver into the mountain, only to have it play out after just 50 feet. The place had a forsaken air about it, the silence broken only by the occasional call of a nighthawk and the soft crunching of his horse's hooves on the rocky soil. Noah dismounted at a small clearing about 100 yards from the mine entrance, tethering his horse to a stunted pine. Better to approach on foot, where he could move more quietly and present a smaller target if this proved to be an ambush. He checked Joseph Walsh's revolver, the familiar weight now a comfort rather than a curiosity. With Grace's derringer in his boot and his hunting knife at his belt, he was as prepared as he could be for whatever or whoever awaited him. The mine entrance loomed before him, a dark mouth in the hillside. No light or movement betrayed the presence of another person, though the fading daylight would make a small flame inside all but invisible from this distance. Noah approached cautiously, all senses alert for any sign of deception or danger. As he neared the entrance, a scuffing sound from within caused him to flatten against the outer wall, gun drawn. "You can put that away," a weary voice called from inside. "If I wanted to shoot you, I'd have done it while you were still on your horse." Noah remained where he was, revolver at the ready. "Show yourself," he demanded. A match flared in the darkness, illuminating a gaunt face beneath the brim of a dusty hat. The man lit a small lantern, its glow revealing a figure seated on an overturned crate just inside the mine entrance. He was thin, with several days' growth of beard, and his left arm hung awkwardly at his side as if injured. "Been a while, Donovan," the man said, his voice rough from disuse or drink. "Though I hear that's not your real name." Noah studied the stranger, searching for any hint of recognition. The face triggered no memories, yet there was something vaguely familiar in the man's bearing. "Do I know you?" Noah asked, keeping the revolver trained on the man's chest. The stranger gave a harsh laugh that dissolved into a cough. "That's right, you wouldn't remember. Not after what Hayes did to you in Silverbridge." He gestured to the empty crate across from him. "Might as well sit. It's a long story, and my lung isn't what it used to be." Warily, Noah stepped into the mine, positioning himself where he could see both the stranger and the entrance. He perched on the edge of the crate, revolver now resting on his knee, still aimed at the man's heart. "Let's start with your name," Noah suggested. "Frank Mercer," the man replied. "Used to be a deputy in Silver Ridge until Hayes decided I was a liability." He pulled aside his jacket to reveal a puckered scar just below his collarbone. "Souvenir of my last day with a badge." The name stirred something in Noah's memory, a fleeting impression of this same man in a deputy's uniform, warning him about something. "You tried to help me," he said slowly, the certainty growing even as the specific memory remained elusive. Mercer nodded, his expression grim. "Fat lot of good it did either of us." "Tell me what happened in Silver Ridge," Noah urged. "I remember arriving there asking questions about land deals, but then nothing clear until weeks later, when I was in Colorado territory." The former deputy took a pull from a flask before speaking. "You rode into town 2 years back calling yourself Ethan Donovan. Said you were looking for work, but you were asking too many questions about the railroad's land acquisitions. Hayes was in Silver Ridge overseeing the completion of that section of track. Noah leaned forward, intent on every word as Mercer continued. You didn't know it then, but you'd worked for Hayes before, doing his dirty work, running people off their land in other towns. But something happened. You started remembering things, asking questions about past jobs. I worked for Hayes? Noah interrupted, disbelief and horror mingling in his voice. Forcing people off their land. Mercer's gaze was steady, not without sympathy. You didn't know who you were. The trading company that bought you from Dr. Mitchell eventually sold your contract to Hayes when you were about 20. Strong young man, good with his hands and his fists, no past to speak of. You were perfect for his purposes. The revelation hit Noah like a physical blow. For years, he had been the instrument of the very man who had destroyed his family. The same man whose railroad now threatened his mother's home. How do you know all this? He demanded. Hayes likes to talk when he drinks, Mercer explained, and he drank a lot in Silver Ridge. I was assigned as his personal security. One night, he got particularly loose-tongued, told me about his perfect enforcer who'd started developing a conscience, said he'd taken care of it. Taken care of it how? Mercer's face darkened. Near as I can piece together, when you started questioning things, Hayes had Sullivan arrange an accident. You took a bad blow to the head, ended up in the care of Hayes's private doctor for weeks. When you came out, you were different, more compliant, less questioning. But it didn't last. In Silver Ridge, I started remembering again, Noah guessed. Not just remembering, investigating, Mercer confirmed. You found evidence that Hayes had arranged the deaths of at least 3 landowners who refused to sell. You came to me, thinking as a deputy I'd help bring him to justice. He gestured to his scarred chest. This was my reward for agreeing to help you. Hayes's men shot me and left me for dead. They took somewhere private. I heard later they nearly beat you to death. Then Sullivan put a bullet in your head. Noah unconsciously touched the thin scar at his hairline, the one he'd always attributed to a drunken fall. But I survived. Mercer nodded. Miracle that. Bullet must have just grazed you, but it was enough to scramble your memories again. Hayes told everyone you'd left town, but one of my informants saw Sullivan's men dumping what they thought was your corpse in Devil's Canyon. I remember waking up in a ravine, Noah said slowly, the memory surfacing like a bubble from dark water. Couldn't recall my name, how I got there. I walked for days before finding a trading post. You're a hard man to kill, Noah Walsh, Mercer said, using his true name for the first time. Hayes thinks you're dead. Sullivan, too. That's the only reason you've survived this long. The full implications of Mercer's story settled over Noah like a shroud. Not only had Hayes and Sullivan destroyed his family and stolen his identity, they had used him as a weapon against others, then tried to murder him when he began to question their methods. And now, unknowingly, he had returned to the very place where it all began, to Copper Creek, to his mother, to the land Hayes still coveted. How did you find me? Noah asked. How did you know I'd be in Copper Creek? Mercer coughed again, a wet, troubling sound. I've been tracking Hayes for 2 years, building a case against him. When I heard he was heading to Copper Creek personally to deal with some holdout widow, I got curious. Imagine my surprise when my contacts reported that Ethan Donovan, a dead man, had shown up in the same town. Hayes is coming to deal with my mother, Noah said grimly, the words sounding strange even to himself. After 15 years of being no one's son, the fierce protectiveness he felt was both foreign and entirely natural. He arrives tomorrow, Mercer confirmed, and he's not coming just to negotiate. From what I've heard, he's bringing professional gunmen with him. He means to end the Walsh problem once and for all. Noah stood abruptly, mind racing with implications and plans. I need to get back to the church. My mother, Eleanor, she has evidence about Hayes and Sullivan, proof of their crimes from 15 years ago. Mercer's eyes widened. That would explain a lot. Hayes has been obsessed with that piece of land beyond all reason. He struggled to his feet, wincing with the effort. I'm coming with you. You're injured, Noah pointed out. Dying, Mercer corrected matter-of-factly. Bullet fragments near my lung, according to the doctor. Nothing to be done. He straightened as much as his failing body would allow. But I can still shoot, and I'd like to see Hayes hang before I go. Noah regarded the former deputy with newfound respect. Here was a man who had lost everything to Hayes' corruption, yet still fought for justice with his last breaths. We ride in an hour, Noah decided. I need you to tell me everything you know about Hayes' operation, every name, every connection. If we're going to stop him, we need to understand exactly what we're facing. As the two men settled in to plan their defense of Copper Creek, the last light faded from the sky, leaving only stars to witness their alliance. In the darkness, Noah felt the weight of his recovered identity pressing upon him, not just as Eleanor's son, but as a man who had been both victim and unwitting accomplice to Hayes' crimes. Tomorrow would bring either justice or more bloodshed to Copper Creek. Either way, Noah Walsh was finally ready to face the truth of his past and fight for the future his father had died trying to secure. Dawn broke over Copper Creek in shades of amber and gold, the early light catching on the steeple of the old church by the river. Inside, preparations were underway for what might be the most dangerous day in the town's troubled history. Noah had returned just before midnight, Frank Mercer in tow, and roused the household with urgent news of Hayes' imminent arrival. Now, as morning spilled through the windows, the main room of the church had been transformed into a war council. Maps spread across tables, weapons checked and loaded, plans discussed in low, determined voices. The younger children had been sent to stay with a trusted family at the edge of town, but Joshua had adamantly refused to go. This is my fight too, the boy had insisted, his young face set with a determination that silenced even Eleanor's objections. They killed my father. I won't hide while you face them. Noah now watched as Joshua carefully cleaned Joseph Walsh's revolver, a task the boy had taken upon himself with surprising proficiency. In the boy's solemn concentration, Noah recognized a reflection of his own journey from child to man, forged too early by violence and loss. We're outnumbered, Frank Mercer observed grimly, studying the crude map of the town they had sketched. His condition had worsened overnight, his breathing labored, face ashen with pain he tried to conceal. Hayes travels with at least 4 professional gunmen, plus whatever muscle Sullivan provides. Numbers aren't everything, Noah replied, though he shared Mercer's concern. We have the advantage of knowing they're coming. Grace looked up from bandages she was preparing, her practical nature asserting itself even in crisis. We should evacuate the church. It's too exposed, too vulnerable. No, Eleanor said firmly, joining their council. Despite having barely slept, she carried herself with quiet dignity, her silver hair neatly pinned, her eyes clear and determined. This land has been our family's home for generations. I won't abandon it to Hayes and his criminals. Besides, Noah added, running would just postpone the inevitable. Hayes won't stop until he has what he wants, or until he's stopped for good. Eleanor placed her hand on his arm, the simple gesture bridging 15 years of separation. Your father would be proud of you, Noah. He always believed that sometimes standing your ground was the only way to honor what matters. The name still felt new to his ears after years as Ethan Donovan, but with each passing hour, Noah felt his true identity settling more comfortably around him, like a coat long forgotten, but perfectly tailored. We need to get word to the federal authorities, Mercer said, interrupted by a bout of coughing that left specks of blood on his handkerchief. Hayes has too many local lawmen in his pocket, but a federal marshal would have the authority to arrest him for the old massacre if we can present your evidence. Denver's at least 3 days' ride, Grace pointed out. Hayes will be here by noon. The telegraph office, Joshua suggested, looking up from his task. We could wire for help. Sullivan will have that watched, Noah countered. Anyone approaching it will be noticed. They fell silent, the challenge before them seeming increasingly insurmountable. Then Eleanor spoke, her voice quiet but firm. There might be another way, she said, another source of help closer than Denver. All eyes turned to her as she continued. The Northern Cheyenne settlement beyond Black Ridge. Chief Running Elk's people. They would have reason to help us bring Hayes to justice for the massacre of their kin. The Cheyenne? Grace asked, surprised. But they've kept to themselves for years, especially after what happened to Whitehawk's band. Joseph maintained a friendship with Running Elk even when others in town shunned the native people, Eleanor explained. After Joseph died, I continued to trade with them, when they needed medicines or supplies. There's trust between us. Noah considered this unexpected possibility. How many warriors could they provide? Perhaps 20, Eleanor estimated, enough to even our odds significantly. Someone would need to reach them quickly, Mercer noted, and without being seen leaving town. I'll go, Joshua volunteered immediately, straightening to his full height, still boyish but determined. I know the back trails better than anyone. Sullivan's men won't catch me. It's too dangerous, Grace protested. No more dangerous than staying here when Hayes arrives, the boy countered with irrefutable logic. I'm the best choice, small enough to avoid detection, fast enough to reach the settlement before noon. Noah studied Joshua's resolute expression, recognizing that this moment represented something essential for the boy, a chance to contribute to justice for his father, to transform from victim to agent of his own destiny. He's right, Noah said finally. Joshua is our best chance to get word to the Cheyenne. He crouched to meet the boy at eye level him. But you'll need to be extremely careful. Hayes's men won't hesitate to hurt even a child. I'm not afraid, Joshua said with quiet certainty. That's what worries me, Noah replied with a hint of a smile. The brave often forget to be cautious. He removed a small knife from his boot, a blade perfectly sized for a boy's hand. Take this. Use it only if you have absolutely no other choice. Joshua accepted the knife solemnly, tucking it securely into his belt. Eleanor quickly wrote a message for Chief Running Elk, sealing it with the Walsh family crest that would authenticate her request for aid. As Joshua prepared to depart through the small rear window of the church, Noah felt a tightening in his chest. Fear for this brave child, but also a strange pride. Remember, he said, gripping the boy's shoulder, getting the message delivered matters more than anything. Don't try to be a hero. I won't, Joshua promised. I'll bring help. Then with a swift movement that caught Noah by surprise, the boy hugged him fiercely before disappearing into the early morning shadows. He'll make it, Eleanor said softly, coming to stand beside her son as they watched the small figure vanish among the trees that lined the river path. Joshua has his father's determination. Noah nodded, hoping her faith was justified. He turned back to the others, his expression hardening with resolve. We need to be ready long before help can arrive. Hayes could be here within hours. As if summoned by his words, the distant sound of hoofbeats reached them. Multiple riders approaching from the direction of town. That's not Hayes, Mercer said, peering cautiously through the window. Too few men, too early. Sullivan, Noah guessed, moving to see for himself. 4 riders, him and 3 deputies. Grace joined them at the window, her face paling. They've got someone with them. A prisoner. Noah's blood ran cold as he made out the small, struggling figure seated before one of the deputies. Joshua, he breathed. They caught him. Eleanor gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. How? He only left minutes ago. They must have been watching the church already, Mercer concluded grimly. Saw him slip out and intercepted him. Noah's mind raced, calculating and discarding options in rapid succession. With Joshua in their custody, the situation had grown exponentially more dangerous, and their hoped-for reinforcements would never arrive. What do they want? Grace asked, fear evident in her voice despite her efforts to remain calm. To draw us out, Noah replied, checking Joseph's revolver one final time, to get us away from the church's protection, into the open where they can pick us off one by one. The riders had stopped about 50 yards from the church. Sullivan's voice carried clearly across the morning air. Walsh, Donovan, whatever you're calling yourself these days, he shouted. Come out and talk. We've got something that might interest you. Noah met Eleanor's eyes, seeing his own fear and determination mirrored there. Stay inside, he told her in grace. Mercer, cover me from the window. If this goes badly, get them out the back way. Noah, Eleanor began, her voice breaking slightly, I've only just found you again. And you won't lose me, he promised, though they both knew it might be a promise he couldn't keep. He kissed her forehead, a gesture that bridged the 15-year chasm between them, then turned to Grace. Take care of her, no matter what happens. Grace nodded, her eyes bright with unshed tears. Be careful, she whispered. Sullivan's desperate. That makes him unpredictable. Noah stepped onto the church porch, moving deliberately, his hands visible but ready to drop to his weapon if needed. Sullivan sat on his horse in the center of his men, Joshua struggling in front of one of the deputies. The boy's face was bruised, his lips split, but his eyes flashed with defiance rather than fear when he saw Noah. "Let the boy go, Sullivan," Noah called, his voice steady despite the rage boiling within him at the sight of Joshua's injuries. "Your quarrels with me." Sullivan's face twisted in a cruel smile. "My quarrels with anyone who stands between Western Pacific and progress, including nosy little boys trying to sneak out of town." He patted his saddlebag meaningfully. "Found a very interesting letter on this one. Something about seeking help from savages against a mutual enemy." Noah kept his expression neutral despite the sinking feeling in his gut. With their plan discovered, the situation had grown even more desperate. "What do you want?" he asked, though he already knew the answer. "Simple exchange," Sullivan replied. "The boy for the Walsh woman and whatever evidence she's been hiding all these years." His eyes narrowed. "Oh yes, Hayes told me all about Joseph Walsh's insurance policy. Hand it over, along with legal papers signing the land to Western Pacific." And the boy walks away. "And if I refuse?" Sullivan drew his pistol, pressing it casually against Joshua's temple. "Then the boy dies, followed by every living soul in that church. Hayes arrives in a few hours with enough men to make it look like an unfortunate accident, perhaps a stove fire that got out of control." Joshua's eyes met Noah's, and the boy gave an almost imperceptible shake of his head, urging Noah not to give in, even at the cost of his own life. The courage of it nearly undid Noah's composure. "I'll need to discuss this with Mrs. Walsh," Noah stalled, his mind working furiously for a solution. "Give me 10 minutes. 5, Sullivan countered. "And just so you understand the stakes." He nodded to the deputy holding Joshua, who produced a knife and pressed it against the boy's arm, drawing a thin line of blood. Joshua didn't cry out, but his face went pale with pain. Noah's hand twitched toward his gun, but he forced himself to remain still. A shootout now would only get the boy killed instantly. 5 minutes, Noah agreed through clenched teeth, backing toward the church door, never taking his eyes off Sullivan and the hostage. Inside, he found Eleanor, Grace, and Mercer waiting tensely for his report. "They want the evidence in the land," he said without preamble, "in exchange for Joshua." "No," the former deputy said immediately. "The moment they have what they want, they'll kill all of us. That evidence is the only leverage we have." "And Joshua?" Grace challenged. "We can't abandon him." "Of course not," Noah agreed. "But Mercer's right. If we surrender the evidence, we lose any chance of bringing Hayes to justice." He turned to his mother. "Is there any other way out of the church? Something Sullivan might not know about?" Eleanor's brow furrowed in thought. "The old root cellar has a tunnel that leads to the riverbank. Joseph had it built during the border troubles as an escape route. It hasn't been used in years. I'm not even sure it's still passable." "Show me," Noah urged. She led them to a worn rug near the back of the church, which concealed a trapdoor leading into a small, dark space beneath the building. The air that rose from it was dank but not stagnant, suggesting the passage might indeed still be open. "It comes out about 100 yards downstream, behind the large boulder shaped like a bear's head," Eleanor explained. "The entrance is hidden by willows." Noah quickly formulated a plan. "Mercer, how's your shooting?" The former deputy coughed wetly but straightened with determination. "My eyes still work, even if my lungs don't. I can hit what I aim at." "Good. I need you to create a distraction from the front window, enough to draw their attention without hitting anyone. Can you do that?" Mercer nodded grimly. "I'll make it count. Grace, you and Mother take the evidence and go through the tunnel. Get to the river and head downstream. There's a fallen cottonwood about half a mile down that creates a natural bridge. Cross there and make for Miller's mine. It's defensible, and Sullivan's men won't expect you there." "What about you?" Eleanor asked, her voice steady despite the fear evident in her eyes. "I'm going after Joshua," Noah said simply. "That's suicide," Mercer objected. "Even if you get the boy, Sullivan's men will cut you down before you make it back to the church." "I'm not bringing him back here," Noah explained. "I'll take him straight to the river crossing. We'll meet you at the mine." Grace touched his arm, her expression troubled. "Noah, there's something you should know. The telegram office received a message yesterday. Preston Hayes' train arrived early. He's already in Copper Creek." This unwelcome news altered the calculus significantly. If Hayes was already in town, their time was even more limited than they'd thought. All the more reason to move quickly, Noah decided. Mother, where's the evidence? Eleanor retrieved the wooden box from its hiding place, pressing it into his hands with a gentle firmness. Your father died protecting this truth. I've guarded it for 15 years. Now it's your turn to carry it forward. The weight of the small box seemed to increase with her words, not just the physical heft of its contents, but the responsibility it represented, passed from father to mother to son across the years. Noah turned to Grace, surprising himself with the intensity of emotion he felt as their eyes met. In just days, she had become essential to him. Her strength, her compassion, her unwavering commitment to truth. Take care of my mother, he said softly, and yourself. We'll be waiting at the mine, she promised. Then, with a boldness that caught him off guard, she leaned forward and pressed her lips to his, brief but fervent, carrying promises neither had time to speak aloud. As they parted, Sullivan's voice bellowed from outside. Time's up, Walsh. What's your answer? Noah handed the precious box to Grace, who secured it in a small pack. Mercer, wait for my signal. When you hear me engaging them, start shooting, high, to draw their attention without hitting Joshua. The former deputy nodded, taking up position at the front window with Eleanor's old rifle. Be careful, Eleanor whispered, embracing her son fiercely. I can't lose you again. You won't, Noah promised, though he knew it might be a promise beyond his power to keep. Now go, quickly. As Eleanor and Grace disappeared through the trap door, Noah moved to the front door, steeling himself for what was to come. He had survived 15 years of displacement, violence, and attempted murder. He had reclaimed his name, his family, his purpose. He would not fail now with so much at stake. Taking a deep breath, he stepped onto the porch to face Sullivan and his men, his hand resting lightly on the grip of his father's revolver. Ready to write the next chapter of the Walsh legacy in whatever language Sullivan forced upon him. We need more time, Noah called out to Sullivan, his mind racing for any strategy that might improve their desperate odds. The evidence is hidden. Mrs. Walsh is gathering it now. Sullivan's face darkened with suspicion. You're stalling, Walsh. I'm being realistic, Noah countered. 15 years of caution don't get undone in 5 minutes. You'll get what you want, but only if the boy remains unharmed. As he spoke, Noah casually shifted position, angling himself to create a clear line of sight between Mercer at the window and the deputies holding Joshua. His eyes locked with the boys, trying to convey a silent message. Be ready to move. Joshua gave an almost imperceptible nod, his young face remarkably composed despite the knife still pressed against his skin. The boy had already gauged his captor's vulnerabilities. The deputy's loose grip, his distraction as he watched the confrontation unfold. Hayes won't wait forever, Sullivan warned, clearly growing impatient. He's been after this land for 15 years. When he gets here, Hayes is already here, Noah interrupted, playing his only card. Arrived yesterday. Strange that he didn't seek you out immediately, isn't it? Almost like he doesn't trust his local lawman anymore. The barb struck home, Sullivan's face flushed with anger and, more importantly, uncertainty. You're lying. Am I? Noah allowed a thin smile. Ask yourself why a man like Preston Hayes would come personally to a backwater like Copper Creek. Not just for a plot of land, no matter how strategically located. He came because he's afraid of what my father discovered, afraid of the evidence my mother has preserved, and most of all, afraid of me. Sullivan's horse shifted nervously beneath him, sensing its rider's growing agitation. You're nothing but a ghost, Walsh. A dead man walking. That's right, Noah agreed, his voice hardening. The man you tried to erase. The boy you sold to traitors after murdering his father. I should have stayed dead, shouldn't I? It would have been so much neater. As he spoke, Noah edged imperceptibly closer to the edge of the porch, judging distances, calculating angles. Just a few more seconds. But I survived, he continued, just like I survived Silver Ridge when you put a bullet in my head and left me for dead in Devil's Canyon. How many times have you failed to kill me now, Sullivan? Hayes must be losing patience. Confusion flashed across Sullivan's face. "What are you talking about? I never—" He stopped mid-sentence, realization dawning as he finally connected Noah Walsh with Ethan Donovan, the enforcer who had worked for Hayes, then started asking too many questions in Silver Ridge. "You," Sullivan breathed, his expression shifting from confusion to shocked recognition. "Donovan, but that's impossible. You died in Silver Ridge." "Did I?" Noah taunted. "Or did Hayes lie to you again? He seems to make a habit of that, doesn't he? Using people until they're no longer useful, then discarding them, just like he'll discard you once he has this land." Sullivan's gun hand twitched with barely controlled rage. "Enough talk. Where's the Walsh woman? Where's the evidence?" "Right here," Noah said calmly, his hand moving to his pocket in a deliberate motion that drew all eyes to him. In that critical moment of distraction, he gave a sharp whistle, the signal for Mercer. The church window exploded with gunfire, shots whistling over the deputies' heads, causing their horses to rear in panic. Simultaneously, Noah drew and fired, his bullet striking the deputy holding Joshua in the shoulder. As the man reeled backward, Joshua seized his moment, wrenching free and rolling from the horse in a controlled fall that Noah had taught him during their carpentry lessons. "Run!" Noah shouted, continuing to fire as he leapt from the porch, providing covering fire for the boy. Joshua sprinted toward the side of the church, ducking low and zigzagging as Sullivan and his remaining deputies recovered from their surprise and returned fire. Bullets splintered the wood around Noah as he dove for cover behind a water trough, reloading with practiced speed. Mercer maintained his barrage from the church window, his shots carefully placed to keep the lawmen pinned down without actually hitting them, preserving the possibility of legal justice rather than summary execution. Sullivan bellowed orders to his men. "Flank them! Carter, get around back! Jackson, with me!" Noah fired twice more, then darted from his position toward the side of the church where Joshua had disappeared. He found the boy pressed against the wall, breathing hard but uninjured. "The river," Noah said tersely, gesturing toward the tree line. "Run for the fallen cottonwood. Don't stop for anything." Joshua nodded, his eyes wide but determined. Together they sprinted across the open ground toward the cover of the trees, bullets kicking up dirt at their heels. They reached the first line of cottonwoods as Sullivan and one deputy rounded the corner of the church, shouting and firing wildly after them. "Keep going," Noah urged Joshua, turning to fire another shot that forced Sullivan to duck behind a rain barrel. "I'll catch up." The boy hesitated only a moment before continuing toward the river, trusting Noah's judgment. Noah fired again, his bullet grazing the deputy's leg and sending the man tumbling with a cry of pain. Sullivan, now alone, took more careful aim. The bullet struck Noah's left arm, spinning him sideways with its impact. He retained his grip on his father's revolver, firing back as he retreated deeper into the trees, using their trunks for cover. "You can't escape, Walsh!" Sullivan shouted, reloading as he advanced. "Hayes has men all over this valley." Noah didn't waste breath responding, conserving his energy as blood seeped from his wounded arm. He caught glimpses of Joshua's small form ahead, already nearing the riverbank. The boy was making good time, staying low and using the underbrush for concealment, just as Noah had taught him. The trees grew denser as Noah approached the river, the ground becoming soft and marshy beneath his feet. Behind him, Sullivan's pursuit was slowed by the unfamiliar terrain and his heavier build. Noah used the advantage to put more distance between them, angling toward the fallen cottonwood that would provide their crossing. When he reached the massive trunk that spanned the river, Noah found Joshua waiting on the near bank, his young face tight with concern. "You're hit," the boy said, eyeing the blood-soaked sleeve of Noah's shirt. "Just a graze," Noah lied, the burning pains suggesting the bullet had done more than simply nick him. "Cross now, quickly. I'm right behind you." Joshua hesitated only a moment before beginning his careful traverse of the natural bridge, his light frame making quick progress across the massive trunk. Noah followed more slowly, the wound hampering his balance as he crossed the swift current below. They were halfway across when a shot rang out, splintering bark inches from Noah's foot. Sullivan had reached the bank, his face contorted with rage as he fired again. "Get down!" Noah shouted to Joshua, dropping to straddle the log and returning fire. His shot went wide, his injured arm throwing off his aim. Sullivan laughed, a harsh sound that carried over the river's rushing voice. "Not so accurate with your left hand, are you, Walsh?" He advanced to the edge of the fallen tree, taking careful aim. Time seemed to slow as Noah faced a terrible choice. He could continue trying to cross, making himself and Joshua perfect targets, or he could face Sullivan here, on this precarious perch above the churning river. "Joshua," he called to the boy who had flattened himself against the trunk, "when I say go, you crawl the rest of the way across. Don't look back. Don't stop. Find your way to Miller's mine." "I won't leave you," Joshua protested. "Yes, you will," Noah said firmly, his voice carrying a weight of authority that brooked no argument. "The evidence has to reach the federal authorities. That matters more than anything else." Joshua's eyes filled with tears of frustration and fear, but he nodded, understanding the importance of their mission. Noah turned back to face Sullivan, who now stood at the near end of the fallen tree, his gun leveled at Noah's chest. "End of the line, Walsh," the marshal called, his voice almost conversational. 15 years overdue, but justice comes to everyone eventually." "Justice?" Noah repeated, steadying himself on the log. "Is that what you call murdering my father? Selling a 17-year-old boy to traders? Massacring native families for railroad land?" Sullivan's expression hardened. "Progress demands sacrifice. Your father was too weak to understand that. Hayes recognized what needed to be done and made you his executioner," Noah observed, his loyal dog doing the killing while he kept his hands clean. The marshal's face flushed with anger. "I built this town. Everything I've done has been for Copper Creek's future." "No," Noah countered, his voice carrying above the river's rush. "Everything you've done has been for Preston Hayes and his blood money. You're nothing but a murderer with a badge." With a roar of rage, Sullivan stepped onto the fallen trunk, advancing toward Noah with his gun raised. "I'm going to enjoy watching you die, again." Noah tensed, preparing for his final gambit. "Joshua," he called without taking his eyes off Sullivan. "Go. Now." The boy began crawling backward along the trunk toward the far bank. Sullivan, momentarily distracted by the movement, shifted his aim toward Joshua. In that critical moment, Noah lunged forward, using his good right arm to drive his shoulder into Sullivan's midsection. The impact knocked both men off balance on the slippery bark. Sullivan's gun discharged harmlessly into the air as they grappled, teetering on the edge of the massive trunk. "Run, Joshua!" Noah shouted as he fought to maintain his grip on Sullivan's gun hand. The marshal was heavier and stronger, but Noah had desperation and righteous fury on his side. They struggled in deadly silence, each knowing that a fall into the swift current below could be fatal. Sullivan managed to smash his fist into Noah's wounded arm, drawing a cry of pain. The momentary weakness allowed the marshal to regain the advantage, forcing Noah backward along the tree trunk. "You should have stayed dead," Sullivan grunted, pressing his forearm against Noah's throat. Through darkening vision, Noah saw Joshua reach the far bank, hesitating as he watched the life-or-death struggle. "Go," he managed to choke out, using his remaining strength to keep Sullivan's gun pointed away from the boy. Joshua finally turned and disappeared into the trees on the far bank, heading towards safety and the others waiting at Miller's mine. With the boy safely away, Noah focused his full attention on Sullivan. The marshal had regained control of his weapon and was bringing it to bear on Noah's head, a triumphant snarl twisting his features. "Say hello to your father for me," Sullivan sneered. In a final desperate move, Noah drove his knee upward into Sullivan's groin. The marshal howled in pain, his grip loosening just enough for Noah to wrench sideways. The sudden movement upset their precarious balance on the log. Together, locked in combat, they toppled into the rushing river below. The cold shock of the water momentarily separated them. Noah fought to surface, his wounded arm nearly useless as he struggled against the current. Nearby, Sullivan flailed wildly, his heavier build working against him in the swift water. As they were swept downstream, Noah caught glimpses of the marshal's panicked face, a man who had spent his life inflicting terror, now consumed by it. For a moment, their eyes met across the churning water, and Noah saw something unexpected. Recognition, not of an enemy, but of a shared humanity, however twisted Sullivan's had become. Then Sullivan disappeared beneath the surface, dragged down by the weight of his gun belt and boots. Noah fought to keep his own head above water, but the river was relentless, carrying him into a series of rapids that battered his already weakened body against partially submerged rocks. A strange peace came over him as the current pulled him deeper. He had done what needed to be done. Joshua was safe. The evidence would reach the proper authorities, and Hayes would finally face justice for his crimes. If this river that had once taken Noah Walsh was now claiming him again, perhaps there was a certain symmetry to it. His last conscious thought was of his mother's face, how she had looked at him when she first recognized her long-lost son. The joy in her eyes had made 15 years of hardship worthwhile. At least they had found each other again, however briefly. Then darkness claimed him, and Noah Walsh surrendered to the river's embrace. Consciousness returned in painful fragments, the rough texture of woolen blankets against his skin, the acrid smell of medicinal herbs, the distant murmur of voices speaking in hushed tones. Noah's eyelids felt impossibly heavy as he struggled to lift them, his body a catalog of injuries demanding attention. When he finally managed to open his eyes, the world swam into focus gradually. He lay in a small room with log walls, afternoon sunlight slanting through a single window. The air was thick with the scent of cedar and sage. "He wakes," a deep voice observed nearby. Noah turned his head with effort to find an elderly Native American man seated beside his pallet, weathered features solemn beneath a fringe of gray hair. The man wore a mixture of traditional clothing and settler garments, a silver medallion hanging from his neck catching the light. "Where?" Noah attempted, his voice emerging as a hoarse whisper. "You are among the Northern Cheyenne," the man replied in accented but clear English. "I am Chief Running Elk. My hunters found you washed up on the riverbank, more dead than alive." Memory flooded back. The confrontation at the church, Joshua's escape, the desperate struggle with Sullivan on the fallen log, the cold embrace of the river. Noah tried to sit up, alarm lending him strength he didn't possess. "My mother!" he gasped, the effort sending pain lancing through his ribs. A gentle hand pressed him back down. "Be still. Your family is safe. The woman doctor and the elder one, they are here." Relief washed over Noah, stronger than the pain of his injuries. "And the boy? Joshua?" Running Elk's weathered face softened slightly. "The brave one with the scarred face? He reached us before my hunters found you. Led us to the others hiding in the old mine." "Thank God," Noah whispered, closing his eyes briefly as the tension drained from his battered body. "Your God had little to do with it," the chief observed without rancor. "The boy's courage and your river brother's strong spirit brought you back to the living." Noah frowned in confusion. "River brother?" Running Elk made a flowing gesture with his hand. "When the river takes a man and returns him, he becomes brother to the waters. Twice now the river has claimed you. Twice returned you. This is powerful medicine." Before Noah could respond to this unexpected perspective on his near drownings, the door opened to admit Grace, her face lighting with relief when she saw him conscious. "Noah," she breathed, hurrying to his side. She pressed her hand to his forehead, the doctor in her immediately assessing his condition. "The fever's broken. How do you feel?" "Like I fought a bear and lost," he admitted with a weak attempt at humor. "But alive." "Mother?" "She's well," Grace assured him, her professional demeanor softening as she took his hand in hers. "Resting now. She's barely left your side for 3 days." 3 days? Noah repeated, stunned by how much time had passed while he'd been unconscious. Running Elk rose with the fluid grace of a man much younger than his apparent years. "I will tell the elder one her son has returned to us," he said, nodding respectfully to Grace before departing. Alone with Noah, Grace's composure faltered slightly. She touched his face with trembling fingers, as if reassuring herself he was truly there. "We thought we'd lost you," she said softly, "when Running Elk's hunters brought you in." "That bad?" Noah asked, though he could tell from the depth of emotion in her eyes that he'd come very close to death. "Your arm was shattered, 3 ribs broken, your lung punctured, not to mention nearly drowning," she recounted with clinical precision that didn't quite mask her distress. "Without the Cheyenne healers working alongside me." She didn't finish the thought. Noah managed to lift his right hand to cover hers where it rested against his cheek. "I'm sorry for frightening you." "Just don't make a habit of it," she replied with a watery smile. "One resurrection is quite enough." The door opened again, this time revealing Eleanor, her face transfigured with joy at the sight of her son awake and alert. She hurried to kneel beside his pallet, gathering his hand in both of hers. "Noah," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "My boy." "I'm all right, Mother," he assured her, the words still new and precious on his tongue. "A little worse for wear, but still here." Eleanor smiled through her tears. "Your father always said you were too stubborn to die easily. It seems he was right." Noah felt a pang at the mention of Joseph Walsh, the father he had only recently remembered, whose legacy he had nearly died trying to preserve. "Sullivan?" he asked, though he suspected the answer. "The river took him," Eleanor confirmed. "His body washed up 10 miles downstream." There was no triumph in her voice, only a solemn acknowledgement that justice, however rough, had found its course. "And Hayes?" Noah pressed, tensing despite his injuries. "The evidence?" "Safe," Grace assured him. "Joshua delivered it as promised. And there's more. Frank Mercer survived the confrontation at the church. He's weak but stable and determined to testify against Hayes." "Where is Hayes now?" Noah asked, his mind already turning to the remaining threat. Eleanor and Grace exchanged a significant look. "Much has happened while you have been unconscious," Eleanor said carefully. "The federal marshal from Denver arrived yesterday, responding to the telegram Joshua managed to send before being captured. With Sullivan dead and Mercer's testimony, plus the evidence from your father's box, they arrested Hayes this morning," Grace continued. "He's being held in Denver to await trial for the massacre, along with multiple charges of fraud, corruption, and murder." Noah absorbed this news with astonishment. After 15 years of impunity, Preston Hayes had finally been brought to justice, and Noah had lived to see it, though he'd played no direct role in the man's arrest. "There's something else you should know," Eleanor added, her expression growing more serious. "When they searched Hayes's private rail car, they found documents, records of his enforcers and their activities over the years." Noah tensed, understanding immediately the implication. His time as Ethan Donovan, working unwittingly for Hayes to intimidate and harass other landowners, was now documented evidence. "The marshal has questions for you," Grace confirmed gently, "about your time working for Hayes." A cold knot formed in Noah's stomach. Would justice demand that he too pay a price for actions committed during those lost years? Even if he had been an unwitting pawn in Hayes' schemes, his hands were not entirely clean. "I'll answer for what I've done," he said quietly, "whatever the consequences." Eleanor squeezed his hand fiercely. "You were a victim, Noah. Hayes stole your identity, your memory, your very self. He used you like a tool, then tried to discard you when you began to question. No court would hold you accountable." "Some would," Noah countered, "and perhaps they should. There were people hurt by my actions, whether I understood what I was doing or not." Grace touched his shoulder gently. "Cross that bridge when you come to it. For now, focus on healing." The marshal agreed to wait until you're stronger before taking your statement. Noah nodded, though the weight of his past actions still pressed heavily on him. He had reclaimed his identity as Noah Walsh, but that didn't erase the years as Ethan Donovan, or the responsibility that came with them. The door opened once more, this time admitting Joshua, who hesitated at the threshold until he saw Noah awake. The boy's face lit with relief as he approached the pallet. "You're alive," Joshua said simply, his young voice catching slightly on the words. "Thanks to you," Noah replied, managing a smile for the boy whose courage had helped save them all. "I hear you got through to the federal marshal." Joshua nodded, a hint of pride showing through his usual solemnity. "After I found Miss Grace and Mrs. Walsh at the mine, Running Elk's warriors escorted me to the next town. The telegraph operator there didn't want to send my message until one of the warriors convinced him." A ghost of a smile touched the boy's lips at the memory. "You did well," Noah told him, his chest tight with emotion that had nothing to do with his broken ribs. "Your father would be proud." Joshua's eyes glistened briefly before he mastered himself. "Chief Running Elk says they found Sullivan's body. Is it really over?" It was Eleanor who answered, her voice gentle but firm. "Hayes's part in this story is ending. He'll face trial for his crimes, including what happened to your father. But our story, yours, Noah's, all of ours, that's just beginning." The simple truth of her words settled over the room. An ending and a beginning, wound together like the strands of a rope. Hayes would answer for his crimes, but the damage he had done, families broken, lives lost, years stolen, could never be fully repaired. The path forward would require its own kind of courage. As if reading his thoughts, Grace spoke. Running Elk has invited us to stay with his people until you're strong enough to travel. After that, she hesitated, looking to Eleanor. After that, his mother continued, we rebuild. The church, our lives, our community. Copper Creek has lived under Hayes's shadow for too long. Now it can become the place Joseph always believed it could be. Noah looked from his mother to Grace to Joshua, his family, both by blood and by choice. The future stretched before him, uncertain but full of possibility. For 15 years, he had wandered without roots, without purpose, without even knowing his own name. Now he knew who he was, where he belonged, and what mattered most. Together, he said simply, reaching out his good hand. Eleanor took it first, then Grace, then Joshua, forming a circle of connection that felt stronger than any vow. Outside the window, the distant murmur of the river provided a constant reminder of the journey that had brought them to this moment, a journey of loss and recovery, of darkness and light, of death and rebirth. Like the river itself, their story continued to flow, finding its way around obstacles, gathering strength from tributaries of courage and love, moving ever forward toward a horizon yet to be discovered. As the afternoon light softened toward evening, Noah felt himself drifting back toward sleep, his battered body demanding rest to continue its healing. But this time, he surrendered to darkness without fear, knowing that when he woke, his family would be there. And for the first time in 15 years, Noah Walsh was truly home. Healing came slowly but steadily under the combined care of Grace and the Cheyenne healers. 2 weeks after the confrontation with Sullivan, Noah sat outside the lodge that had become their temporary home, his splinted left arm resting across his lap, his face turned toward the afternoon sun. The Cheyenne settlement occupied a sheltered valley beyond Black Ridge, hidden from casual discovery by the natural contours of the land. Here, Running Elk's people maintained their traditional ways while adapting to the changing world around them, a delicate balance that had allowed them to survive when other bands had been destroyed or displaced. Noah watched as Joshua worked alongside several Cheyenne boys, learning to construct a small fishing weir in the stream that ran through the settlement. The orphan had thrived during their stay, his natural resilience finding outlet in endless curiosity about Cheyenne ways. The tribal elders, in turn, had welcomed his interest, seeing in the scarred boy a bridge between worlds. He belongs here, Eleanor observed, settling beside Noah on the rough-hewn bench. I've never seen him so at peace. Noah nodded, noting the easy confidence in Joshua's movements, the occasional smile that transformed his serious face. The Cheyenne understand loss and survival in ways most settlers never will. There's comfort in that shared experience. Eleanor studied her son's profile, still marveling at having him beside her after so many years of absence. And you, have you found peace here as well? A measure of it, Noah admitted, though his tone suggested complications beneath the surface. But there are still questions I need to answer, about Hayes, about my time as Ethan Donovan. The federal marshal returns tomorrow for your statement, Eleanor reminded him gently. Are you certain you're strong enough? Strong enough to tell the truth, Noah confirmed, whatever consequences that brings. Eleanor's hand covered his, her touch conveying support that required no words. They sat in companionable silence, watching the activity of the settlement. Women preparing hides, children playing a game with painted stones, warriors returning from a hunting expedition with fresh game. I never thanked you, Noah said after a while, turning to meet his mother's gaze, for keeping faith all these years, for not giving up on me even when everyone else said I was gone. Eleanor's eyes glistened with emotion, though her voice remained steady. A mother knows her child, Noah. Even when separated by time and distance, that connection remains. But 15 years, Noah persisted, with no word, no sign of life. How did you maintain hope for so long? A complex expression crossed Eleanor's face. Determination mingled with something deeper, more mysterious. There's something I never told you, she said quietly, something that kept my hope alive when doubt would have been easier. Noah waited, sensing the importance of whatever revelation was coming. 3 years after the flood, Eleanor continued, her gaze distant with memory, a trader passed through Copper Creek, a man from one of the caravans that traveled between settlements. He stopped at the church, ostensibly seeking supplies, but really to deliver a message. A message? Noah echoed, a chill running down his spine. Eleanor nodded, her fingers unconsciously twisting her wedding band. He said a young man in their company had asked him to tell Eleanor Walsh of Copper Creek that her son was alive, that he remembered little of his past but knew someone was waiting for him. Noah stared at his mother in disbelief. I sent word to you, but I don't remember. The trader said you were feverish from an infected wound when you gave him the message, Eleanor explained. He wasn't even certain you'd survive, but he'd promised to deliver your words if he ever passed through Copper Creek. Why didn't you try to find me? Noah asked, though he suspected the answer. I did, Eleanor said, a shadow of old grief crossing her face. I sold everything of value to hire a guide to take me to the caravan's last known location. But by the time we arrived, they had moved on, and no one knew where, Shittum. I searched for months before my funds ran out, and I had to return home. She squeezed his hand, her eyes full of remembered determination. But that message sustained me through the darkest times, even when I began to doubt my own memory of it. When others suggested I'd imagined the whole encounter out of desperate hope, I knew in my heart you were alive somewhere. Noah absorbed this revelation with wonder. Even in his most confused state, some essential part of him had remembered his mother, had reached across the void of lost memory to reassure her. The knowledge was both comforting and painful. To think how close they might have come to reunion years earlier, only to miss each other in the vastness of the frontier. I wish I could remember sending that message, he said softly. I wish I'd tried harder to find my way back to you. You found your way home in the end, Eleanor replied, her voice rich with gratitude. That's what matters now. The sound of approaching footsteps interrupted their conversation. Grace appeared around the corner of the lodge, her expression brightening at the sight of them together. Am I interrupting? She asked. Never, Eleanor assured her, making room on the bench. We were just sharing old memories. Grace joined them, her shoulder brushing Noah's in a casual intimacy that had developed during his recovery. Her presence brought a different kind of warmth to Noah's heart, not the rekindled flame of family love, but something new and tentative, full of possibility. Frank Mercer is asking for you, Grace told Noah. He's having a difficult day. Noah nodded gravely. The former deputy's condition had deteriorated steadily during their stay with the Cheyenne. The bullet fragments near his lung were causing increasing damage, beyond even Grace's considerable medical skill to address. I'll go to him, Noah said, rising carefully to avoid jarring his healing ribs. He deserves whatever comfort we can provide. Grace walked beside him as they made their way to the small lodge where Mercer rested, her hand occasionally steadying him when the uneven ground challenged his balance. He knows he's dying, she said quietly. He asked me this morning how much time he has left. I couldn't lie to him. What did you tell him? That it could be days or weeks, but not longer, Grace replied, professional composure masking deeper emotions. He seemed almost relieved to have a time frame. They found Mercer propped up on his pallet, his once robust frame now gaunt with illness. His breathing labored, but his eyes still sharp and alert. He managed a thin smile as Noah entered. Walsh, he greeted, his voice a raspy whisper. You're looking better than the last time I saw you. Hard not to, Noah replied with gentle humor, settling carefully beside the dying man. Last time I saw you, I was half dead in a river. Mercer's laugh turned into a painful cough that took several moments to subside. When he could speak again, his expression had grown more serious. Marshal Kingsley returns tomorrow, he said, naming the federal lawman who had arrested Hayes. I've written out my full testimony about Silver Ridge and Hayes's operations. In case I'm not, he didn't finish the thought. You've done more than enough, Noah assured him. Without your evidence, Hayes might never have faced justice. Mercer waved away the praise with a weak gesture. Deathbed redemption doesn't balance the scales. I looked the other way too many times, Walsh. Convinced myself I was just following orders, just doing my job. The self-recrimination in his voice struck a chord in Noah, who carried his own burden of complicity from his time as Ethan Donovan. You stood up when it mattered, he said firmly. That counts for something. Maybe, Mercer conceded, though doubt lingered in his eyes. But there's something else I need to tell you. Something about Hayes that didn't make it into my written testimony. Noah leaned closer, sensing the importance of whatever revelation was coming. I'm listening. Mercer's voice dropped lower, forcing Noah to strain to catch his words. Hayes knew exactly who you were all along, from the moment Sullivan handed you over to those traitors 15 years ago. He kept track of you, Walsh. Waited until you were old enough to be useful, then arranged to buy your contract from the caravan. Noah felt the blood drain from his face as the implications sank in. Are you saying my entire time with Hayes was deliberate? That he knowingly employed Joseph Walsh's son to terrorize other landowners? Mercer nodded, pain evident in his eyes that had nothing to do with his physical condition. He called it his perfect irony, the son of the man who died trying to stop him, now working to further his empire. He used to brag about it when he was drunk, how he'd turned Joseph Walsh's righteous offspring into his personal enforcer. The revelation hit Noah like a physical blow. His time as Ethan Donovan had been no accident of fate, no random consequence of memory loss, but a calculated cruelty by the man who had destroyed his family. Does the marshal know this? He asked, his voice tight with controlled emotion. It's in my written testimony, Mercer confirmed, but I wanted to tell you myself. You deserve to hear it from someone who witnessed Hayes' satisfaction in the scheme. Noah sat in stunned silence, absorbing this final twist in the long saga of Hayes' villainy. The man hadn't merely profited from Noah's disappearance. He had deliberately weaponized Joseph Walsh's son against other innocent families, a perversion so calculated it bordered on the demonic. Thank you for telling me, Noah said finally, the words inadequate for the grim gift Mercer had given him, the truth, however painful. Mercer nodded, exhaustion evident in every line of his wasted frame. One more thing, he added, his voice fading as his strength ebbed. There's a journal in my saddlebag. Names, dates, locations of every landowner Hayes forced out or eliminated. I kept records, even when I was too cowardly to act. Might help some of those families recover what was stolen from them. I'll make sure it reaches Marshal Kingsley, Noah promised, and that those families get justice. A ghost of a smile touched Mercer's pale lips. Justice, he repeated. Been chasing that word a long time. Never thought I'd see it catch up to Preston Hayes. His eyes drifted closed, his breathing growing more labored. Worth dying for, I suppose. As Mercer slipped into an exhausted sleep, Noah sat with him a while longer, his mind reeling with the former deputy's revelations. When he finally rose to leave, Grace waited outside, her face reflecting concern at whatever she saw in his expression. What is it? She asked quietly. What did he tell you? Noah shook his head, not yet ready to articulate the bitter knowledge Mercer had imparted. Later, he promised, when I've had time to make sense of it myself. Grace accepted this with the patience that characterized her, falling into step beside him as they walked back toward their lodge. The afternoon was waning, long shadows stretching across the settlement as the sun began its descent behind the mountains. The marshal arrives tomorrow, she observed, echoing Eleanor's earlier reminder. Yes, Noah acknowledged, his thoughts still churning with Mercer's revelation and its implications for his statement to the lawman. And it's time I faced the truth of what I did as Ethan Donovan. All of it. Grace stopped walking, turning to face him directly. Noah, she said firmly, using his true name with deliberate emphasis, you were a victim of Hayes' machinations, not his accomplice. Whatever you did while your memory and identity were stolen from you was still done by these hands, Noah interrupted, holding up his palms as if they bore visible stains. People suffered because of my actions, Grace. Families lost their homes, their livelihoods. The fact that I didn't understand what I was part of doesn't erase their pain. No, she agreed softly. It doesn't, but it does change how justice should view your role. She touched his face gently, her eyes full of a fierce compassion that threatened to undo his composure. The man standing before me now is Noah Walsh, son of Joseph and Eleanor, protector of orphans, a man willing to risk his life for truth. That's who you truly are. Her faith in him was both balm and burden, comfort for his troubled conscience, yet a standard he feared he could never fully deserve. But as the setting sun gilded her auburn hair and illuminated the certainty in her eyes, Noah felt something shift within himself. Not absolution for past sins, but perhaps the beginning of a path toward reconciliation, with his history, with those he might have harmed, and ultimately, with himself. "Thank you," he said simply, covering her hand with his own where it rested against his cheek. They stood together as twilight descended over the Cheyenne settlement, the first stars appearing in the darkening sky. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, the marshal's questions, the formal accounting of Hayes's crimes, the painful detailing of Noah's unwitting role in them. But for this moment, in this peaceful valley far from the conflicts that had shaped and nearly destroyed him, Noah Walsh allowed himself to believe in the possibility of a future beyond retribution, a future where healing might eventually overcome even the deepest wounds of the past. 1 year later, the autumn sun cast a golden glow across the rebuilt church by the river, its fresh white paint gleaming against the backdrop of cottonwoods turned amber and crimson. The steeple, once listing precariously to one side, now stood straight and proud, topped with a small bell that rang clear and true each Sunday morning, calling the people of Copper Creek to gather. Noah Walsh stood on the porch, watching as children played in the churchyard. No longer orphans, but members of families, some newly formed, others reunited. After Hayes's conviction, Marshal Kingsley had used Mercer's meticulous records to track down those who had been forced from their homes by Western Pacific's enforcers. Some had chosen to return, reclaiming land and rebuilding lives long thought lost. Thinking deep thoughts, Grace's voice drew him from his contemplation. She stepped onto the porch beside him, her auburn hair catching the sunlight, a simple gold band glinting on her left hand, a match to the one Noah wore. "Just appreciating how much has changed," he replied, taking her hand in his. "A year ago, I didn't even know my own name. Now, now you've helped rebuild an entire town," she finished, her eyes reflecting pride and love. Not to mention facing down a federal inquiry with more courage than most men could muster. The inquiry had been rigorous but fair. Noah had insisted on a full accounting of his actions as Ethan Donovan, refusing to hide behind his status as Hayes's victim. In the end, Judge Franklin had ruled that while Noah bore moral responsibility for his actions, the legal culpability lay with Hayes, who had deliberately exploited Noah's amnesia and manipulated him through false information. Instead of imprisonment, the court had ordered Noah to assist in the restoration of properties he had helped take, a sentence of restitution rather than punishment. Some of the families had been wary at first, even hostile, but over months of honest labor and humble acknowledgement of his unwitting role in their suffering, many had come to respect, if not forgive, the man who had once been their tormentor. "Mr. Walsh," Joshua's voice rang out as the boy ran toward them from the direction of town, waving a newspaper. At 13, he had grown taller, his frame filling out with the healthy vigor of youth no longer burdened by secrecy and fear. The scar on his face had faded somewhat, though it would always mark him as a survivor. "They printed it," he exclaimed, thrusting the paper into Noah's hands. "Front page of the Denver Post." Noah unfolded the newspaper to find the headline: "Western Pacific magnate sentenced, Hayes to serve life for massacre of Northern Cheyenne." Beneath it was a smaller headline: "Historic land settlement reached with native tribes." "Your testimony made the difference," Grace told Joshua, who beamed with pride. The boy had traveled to Denver with Eleanor to testify at Hayes's trial, his clear recounting of his father's discovery of the mass graves proving crucial to the prosecution's case. "Chief Running Elk says the spirits of his ancestors can rest now," Joshua reported, having maintained his friendship with the Cheyenne. Indeed, the settlement mentioned in the paper had been partly Noah's doing, a restoration of land rights to Running Elk's people, along with federal recognition of their boundaries. "Speaking of resting," Grace said, glancing toward the small cemetery behind the church, "we should bring fresh flowers for Frank before the gathering." Noah nodded solemnly. Mercer had lived just long enough to see Hayes convicted, slipping away peacefully the day after the verdict was announced. They had buried him with honor beside Joseph Walsh, two men who had stood against corruption in their own ways. As if summoned by the thought of her husband, Eleanor emerged from the church, a basket of fresh-baked bread in her arms. At 61, she moved with the energy of a woman decades younger, her silver hair gleaming in the autumn light. "Are you three going to stand there all day?" she called with mock severity. The town will be arriving any minute, and there's still work to be done. Today marked not just the anniversary of Hayes's arrest, but the formal dedication of the new Copper Creek Community Hall, a project that had united the town in purpose after years of division and fear. Once completed, the hall would house not only town meetings, but also a school, with Eleanor as its first teacher. "Yes, ma'am," Noah replied with a smile, heading down the steps to help her with the basket. As he took it from her hands, she reached up to touch his face, a mother's gesture that never failed to fill him with gratitude for this second chance at being her son. "Your father would be so proud," she said softly, "not just of what you've done, but of how you've faced the truth, all of it, without flinching." The truth had indeed been painful. During his testimony at Hayes's trial, Noah had been forced to confront the full extent of his actions as Ethan Donovan, actions meticulously documented in Hayes's records. He had intimidated, threatened, and sometimes physically harmed those who stood in the railroad's way. The weight of that knowledge would always be with him. Yet from that bitter truth had come healing. Each act of restitution, each sincere apology, each day of rebuilding what had been broken, all were steps on a path not of forgetting, but of redeeming. "I've been meaning to show you something," Eleanor said, reaching into her pocket. She withdrew an envelope, yellowed with age. "It came yesterday from a Mr. Daniels in St. Louis. He was the trader who brought me your message all those years ago." Noah opened the envelope with careful fingers to find a scrap of paper inside, the handwriting unsteady but recognizable as his own, or rather the hand of a fevered young man barely clinging to his identity. "Tell Eleanor Walsh of Copper Creek her son lives. I remember little, but I know someone waits for me. I will find my way home someday." "You kept your promise," Eleanor said, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "Later than we hoped, but just when we needed you most." The church bell began to ring, signaling the approach of the first wagons from town. Joshua ran to greet them, his voice carrying back excited introductions. Among the arrivals were several families Noah had once displaced as Ethan Donovan, families who had, with varying degrees of reluctance and grace, accepted his presence in the rebuilding of Copper Creek. Some would never fully forgive him, he knew. Mrs. Abernathy still stiffened when he entered her store, remembering how he had forced her family from their ranch. Old Mr. Peterson would likely go to his grave cursing the name Donovan, but others, like the Millers and the Jacobsons, had come to see him as Noah Walsh, a man trying, however imperfectly, to make amends. "Are you ready for this?" Grace asked, sensing his momentary hesitation. Noah looked out over the gathering crowd, at Joshua proudly showing a group of children the newspaper, at Eleanor greeting old friends and new neighbors alike, at the town coming together on land that had once been coveted for its value, but was now treasured for its heart. "I'm ready," he said, and knew it for truth. As they walked together down the church steps to join the celebration, Noah caught a glimpse of the river beyond the trees, the river that had twice taken and twice returned him, as Running Elk had said.